Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Yo, unless I've gone completely senile, and that might be the case, let's be real, I'm aging faster than Asmongold, I think this is our 200th episode. So thank you all insanely much for sticking with me for 200 whole episodes of me never figuring out how to shut up. You're all the best. Quick warning though, I had a hankering for some school-related stories on this one, and I feel like school is kind of like work for people who don't have a career yet, so it counts. Anyway, prepare for skinwalkers, a glitch at Aldi, and extremely haunted schools. These are tales from the break room. And you should leave us a review or follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you. Ghost at my law school. From Bobwar, Wasabort. A few years ago, I attended law school in LA. I'd heard rumors it was haunted when I first started. And as a believer in the supernatural, I tried to stay away from spots at the school where people had seen spirits. I've encountered ghosts and what I'm sure was a demon before, making me wary of what people report as ghosts. While at school, I had multiple encounters with an entity that called herself Sharon, as well as other spirits. The first was late at night in the school's library. The library had 3 floors with a basement, ground, and second floor. I tried to stay on the ground and second floors, as the basement always scared me. It was designed in a way where if you whispered just right, it would always sound like a person was right next to you. It was also where one of the 2 restrooms was. I left my study group to use the restroom. When I got into the basement and turned the corner to the restroom, I saw a woman in an old vintage red dress. She reminded me of a secretary for some reason. She walked down the hall, and as I was curious who she was, I followed her. That hallway ended with a wide-open room filled with corrals and a dead end, with the only way out being behind me. When I got there, she was nowhere to be found, and I know for a fact I had not seen her come back down the hallway towards me. While I was walking around, I asked out loud, "Who's there?" I could feel something, and something whispered back, "Sharon." I left that basement so fast, my study group was confused as to why I was packing up like a madman. For the next 3 years, I only went into that basement whenever the sun was out. I'm also sure the woman I saw was not Sharon, but that's for later. The second encounter I had was on the second floor of the library, funny enough. My friend, I'll call her Elle, and I were getting ready for exams. We were in the library near closing. The second floor had a hallway of study rooms that were quite popular. All night I'd walked up and down, seeing who might still be there. We were in the last study room on our side of the hall, and by this point, there was no one else around. At closing, the lights to the rooms automatically go off, and when they did for us, we began to pack up to leave, as we both lived on campus. We were pretty spooked already, since it was darkish and no one was around. When I opened the door, we both heard what sounded like children laughing and playing. Elle told me, "Run," and we did. As we ran, we heard this loud thud above us, which was odd as there was no other upper floor on this side of the building. We looked at each other as the sound kept going, and we heard a man yell before the last thud on the roof. We ran all the way to the stairs, and by the time we hit the landing halfway to the ground floor, I could feel something watching us. I told Elle then, "Whatever you do, don't look back." I had no idea what was behind us, but I had the strangest feeling it was a woman. All I knew was if we did turn to look, we would not like what we saw. The librarian saw us running out the door, but looked as if it wasn't the first time it ever happened. After that, Elle and I never studied till closing again. The last major encounter I had was during finals of my first year. Like I said, I lived on campus, and I was close with a lot of the other students who did as well. I had an open door policy where no matter what time it was, people could stop by, and many did. like Elle or another friend I'd grown close to. One night, I was woken up by my doorbell. All the apartments had these obnoxiously loud bells that filled the room. It was unmistakable. I looked at my phone and saw it was 3 a.m. I was confused, but thought maybe Elle or my other friend were up late and were freaking out over our first exam that week. When I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. That should have been my first clue. When I opened the door, I had the distinct feeling of someone walking past me. I thought it was strange, but I've never been so wrong in my life. When I sat on my bed, I experienced something I'd only encountered one other time, when I had run into what I was sure was a demon. My vision split. I was looking through my eyes and the eyes of another person, but from the corner of my room. Something was looking at me. I could feel her anger and hatred, and it was focused directly on me. I could then see a woman in all white with long black hair staring at me, but also I could see myself on the bed. I was terrified, almost rooted in place. I was raised Catholic, and I kept a rosary on my nightstand. In that moment, the part of my brain not paralyzed by fear willed my hand to grab it, and I began to pray. I've prayed 1,000 times in my life, but this time I felt as if I was praying for my life. A part of me knew this was Sharon. It was familiar somehow. I prayed for 30 minutes. The whole time I felt as if I was in a tug-of-war with Sharon's will. At some point, she vanished, and my vision returned to normal. I felt exhausted, though, but I was too scared to fall asleep. I don't remember falling asleep, but I know that I woke up to my doorbell again. When I looked this time, it was my friend, Kay, at the door. I let her in, but when I looked down, there was a bare footprint on my door seal. The outlines of toes were unmistakable, and Kay saw them too. They weren't there the day before. My parents came by that day, and I believe my mother and I share this ability to sense the supernatural. When she walked into the apartment, she looked at me like something was off. When I got a moment to speak to her alone, she asked if something had been in my apartment, and I told her yes. The next 3 years, I had multiple other smaller encounters with Sharon, but nothing like that night. I've only been that scared on 2 other occasions with the supernatural. I still have that rosary within reach of my bed years later, and it will stay there until I pass on to the next life. Something lives in the fields around my campus. From Danny D123. I've lived in Michigan my entire life. I grew up in the Metro Detroit area, went to high school in Saginaw, and now attend a small college in southern Michigan. I'm going to keep the name of the school itself private for the sake of anonymity. It's a small college, fewer than 2,000 students, sitting smack dab in the middle of nowhere. The closest major city is about a 45-minute drive away, and getting to campus means passing endless farm fields and small towns that don't offer much more than a Dollar General and a blinking yellow light. I don't mind this change of pace, though. I've lived in the suburbs and city my whole life, so it's been fun for me to live in a rural area for a change. The town is quiet, and the campus is beautiful in many ways, especially in the winter when the snow is falling. Because of where the college is located, wildlife regularly wanders through campus. Deer are the most common larger animal that comes through, and they've become so used to the students that you can walk within a few feet of them without them even lifting their heads. Most of the area's wildlife is harmless. Most of it, but not all. The first time I saw this creature, I was walking back to my dorm from the library late into the night. It was after 1 in the morning, and the library had just closed. The snow was falling lightly, just enough to blur the edges of everything. My dormitory was located on the very edge of campus, about a 10-minute walk from the library. Beyond it were open fields, a patch of forest, and a small park owned by the college far off in the distance. As I walked along the sidewalk, beginning to wish I'd brought a heavier jacket, I glanced down the road toward my dorm. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, only the snow-covered fields and the dull glow of a distant streetlight. But when I looked again, something was stepping out of the trees under the streetlight. At first, I assumed it was a dog of some sort. It looked like one from that distance. Maybe it was a stray or a farm dog that had gotten loose. But as it stepped fully into the light, I realized something was very wrong. It was enormous, larger than any dog I'd ever seen, and the way it moved wasn't right. It seemed to crawl on all fours, but not in the way a dog would. That was because whatever this thing was did not have regular front paws. What it had instead looked like oversized, heavily furred human hands. That was enough for me. I sprinted toward my dorm, slipping on the frozen ground, but managing to reach the door in record time. I never heard anything chase me, but I didn't look back. As far as I know, that creature never noticed me at all. But I wasn't going to sit around and wait for it to do that. For a while after this event, I tried explaining away what I'd seen. I told myself it was just exhaustion from studying, that the snow and darkness had distorted my vision, that it had been a normal, but oversized dog. However, nothing I came up with fully settled. Deep down, I knew what I'd seen could not be explained. But eventually, classes and exams pushed the memory of the encounter aside. Midterms turned into finals, and before I knew it, the semester was over. The next time I saw the creature was during the first semester of my sophomore year. It was still early in the semester, but classes were getting difficult. I was studying in my dorm room on the 3rd floor. From my window, I could see the wide field behind the building. Looking out, I saw a group of deer packed tightly together at the far end of the field. Something shot out across the field and caught my attention. I knew instantly what it was. The creature was sprinting across the field at an unnatural speed. It launched itself at one of the deer, which barely had any time to react. It slammed into the deer, tearing into its side with powerful jaws. Then, as if the deer weighed almost nothing to it, the creature lifted the thing off the ground and carried it off into the trees. I sat at my desk long after it was gone, frozen with fear and bewilderment. After that, I avoided the edges of campus at all costs, as much as I possibly could, especially after dark, which wasn't easy given the campus's small size. I even considered switching dorms to a building closer to the center of campus. But in the end, I stayed where I was, not wanting to leave my friends and the nice room I had. A month after that, I had my 3rd and final encounter. I was driving home for the weekend, but due to an on-campus event, which ran later than expected, the sun had already set. As I drove down the road leading away from campus, I noticed something lying in the left lane. As I got closer, I realized it was a deer. This deer, however, had not been hit by a car. Deep gouges had been torn through its side, as if massive fangs had ripped the flesh to ribbons. I slowed down, got over to the other side of the road, and passed it, feeling uneasy. Then I checked my rearview mirror. Standing in the middle of the road, beside the mutilated deer, was the same creature. This time, I could see it clearly. It had to be 8 feet tall. Black and gray fur covered a heavily muscle-bound body. Its mouth was full of long fangs, dripping with what looked like blood. And it wasn't on all fours. It was standing upright on 2 legs, watching me. I floored it. I don't know why it didn't chase me. It easily could have. I'd already seen how fast it could move. Instead, it just stood there, staring as I sped away. I never saw it again. Whatever it was, it never seemed all that interested in me, thank God. I'm very grateful for that. Still, knowing something like that exists somewhere near where I live keeps me awake some nights. It's been nearly a year since my last encounter. Whether it left the area to find new hunting grounds or is still roaming the fields around my college, I'm not sure. But I won't be upset if I never have to see it again. The Original Inhabitant, from Creek Peeper 22. I stopped telling this story out loud because people always want me to turn it into a joke. I can't do that without feeling stupid. I can still picture one part of it too clearly, and once you see something like that, it sits in your head for a very long time. In 2012, I was a sophomore at a college in Oregon. That fall, it rained all the time. The dorm I lived in was one of those older brick buildings that had been quote-unquote updated a dozen times without ever really feeling modern. The carpet was always damp, and the air always smelled faintly of detergent because the laundry room was in the basement, and the vents never did their job quite right. The building was 4 floors with a basement. The layout was simple. One long hallway on each floor, doors on both sides, a lounge near the stairwell, vending machines at the far end. You could hear everything through the walls, so most nights you would hear someone's music, people in the hallway, the occasional argument, and somebody laughing out loud. There was also the story everybody knew by the second week. They called it the Walker, though I've also heard it called the Surveyor. Depends on who you talk to. The actual details change here and there, but the core of the story is always the same. Late at night, you would hear slow footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. Sometimes you would hear them above you, even when you were on the top floor. Sometimes the steps would stop outside a door for a long time. People claimed they could feel when it was outside their door. I didn't take this seriously. I'd lived in enough old buildings to know they make noise. Could be pipes clicking or floors settling. People act weird in dorms because they're tired and half drunk and want a story. The only part of the legend that stands out to me was what older students would say when they got quiet. They would say it wasn't a dorm ghost. They would say the land had history and the building set on something the school never talked about. They never had a solid explanation as to what that was, which was part of what made it stick for me. It was just vague enough, so anybody could fit it to whatever they already believed. But I filed it away as dorm nonsense, until late one Friday night. A bunch of us ended up in my room because my roommate, Ethan, had a bottle, and we were bored. It was raining hard enough that you could hear it through the window, even with the music turned up. There were 8 people in a room built for 2. We had a laptop going with a playlist. We had cheap cups. Nobody was trying to be deep, and it was just one of those nights. Someone suggested Truth or Dare, because we were 19, and we were out of other ideas. It started out dumb and normal. Text somebody, do a shot, go ask the RA something stupid. People were laughing. It was loud enough that someone 2 doors down yelled at us through the wall. Then Nicole, who lived on our floor, said we should do a dorm dare. She said it like she was proud of herself for thinking of it. She asked if we'd heard the story about the 4th floor and the service hallway. Everybody had heard some version, but I hadn't heard all the details. Nicole said that there was an unmarked door on the 4th floor near the vending machines. Behind it was a narrow hallway used by maintenance. At the end, there was a metal door that was usually locked. The dare was to go there, knock 3 times, then ask, "Is anyone walking tonight?" I remember laughing, saying that sentence sounded ridiculous out loud. A couple people laughed at me, but Nicole did not. Ethan did, and that was the problem. Ethan loved dares. He loved being the guy who did the dumb thing first. So he said he would do it. I told him we were not doing that, but he said we were. 2 other people said they would come too, which made it feel safer. I ended up going because I didn't want Ethan going off with a couple of half-drunk guys to the 4th floor We left the room and the hallway noise dropped behind us. The dorm at night always felt different once you stepped out of a loud room. The lights made everything look washed out. The carpet was darker in the center where people walked most. You could smell wet shoes. We took the stairs up, 3rd floor, then the 4th. By the time we hit the 4th floor landing, the air felt colder. I noticed it right away. Ethan didn't say anything, but he slowed down. The 4th floor hallway was empty. No doors down, no voices, no TV noise. It wasn't dead silent because you could still hear the building, but it felt closed off. The vending machines at the end made their usual sounds. Nicole had described an unmarked door. There it was, beige like the walls, so I'd probably walked past it before without even noticing or caring. There was a faded sign on it that said, "Authorized personnel only." Ethan went over, pushed it, and it opened. Inside was a narrow cinder block hallway. Pipes ran along the ceiling. A single bulb in a wire cage lit the middle of the hall. The air smelled off, like mud. It didn't smell like a typical basement. It smelled more like dirt after rain. At the end was a flat gray metal door. No window, just a plate and a keyhole. Ethan turned, then grinned at us. But his grin looked a bit nervous. He went ahead and knocked 3 times. The knocking echoed down the hallway and came back in a way I didn't like. The sound felt bigger than the space should have allowed. Then Ethan said the line, "Is anyone walking tonight?" Nothing happened for a second. I almost relaxed. I nearly felt stupid for being so tense about it. But then we heard a footstep. It sounded like it was above us, which made no sense as we were on the 4th floor. Then I realized it wasn't above us, it was behind us, in the service hallway, coming from the direction of the door we had just used. Another step, then another. Slow steps, close enough that I could tell it was not the usual building noise. It sounded like someone putting their full weight down on each step. One of the guys whispered, "Stop it." He sounded scared. Nobody had done anything, though. Ethan took a step backward until his shoulder hit the metal door. I could see his throat moving when he swallowed. The footsteps kept coming. They didn't speed up, nor did they slow down. I turned to look down the service hallway toward the door we came in through. But it was empty. There was nowhere someone could hide. It was just a straight hallway. The light did not reach the doorway well, but I could still see the outline. Nobody was there. The footsteps stopped about 10 feet behind us, and the air grew freezing cold. It felt harder to breathe, not because I was choking, but because my body was trying to stay quiet. That's when the bulb in the wire cage flickered and went out. Ethan pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam was shaky. It lit up the cinder block walls and the pipes. That's when I saw the handprints. They were on the wall to our left, wet and dark. They weren't dusty. They had edges. You could see finger shapes. They started at about waist height and continued upward in a staggered line, higher than any of us could reach without standing on something. Ethan whispered, "No." From the metal door in front of us, we heard a scratch. It sounded like nails dragging slowly across paint. Ethan stepped away from the door so fast that he nearly hit me. He swung the flashlight beam around, and it caught more wet marks on the pipes. Then, on the ceiling. I stood there staring at the ceiling, because my brain could not accept what I was seeing. The scratch came again, longer now. Then a voice spoke from behind us. It was quiet, but it wasn't far away. It was close enough to make my skin tighten, and it sounded exactly like the words, "You asked." Nobody moved for a second. Then Ethan grabbed my sleeve and pulled. We turned toward the exit door and started walking fast. We didn't run, and that wasn't bravery. It was fear. None of us wanted to make a mistake that felt like breaking a rule. When we hit the service door and pushed back into the normal hallway, the lights were on and the vending machines were humming. It should have felt normal, but it didn't. Wet footprints had appeared on the carpet outside the service door. Bare footprints. These were not normal. The toes were much too long. The stride between them was too long for a person walking at a normal pace. The prints went straight toward the stairwell door, which was about 20 feet away. Then they did something I still don't know how to explain. They continued up the wall beside the stairwell door. The wet marks went vertical, climbing from the carpet up the painted wall. The last print was near the ceiling, right at the corner where the wall met the ceiling tile. Then they stopped. Ethan stood staring with his phone light pointed at them, and his mouth was wide open. One of the other guys whispered, "I can't," and he started to back away. We went down the stairs. We didn't talk until we got back to our floor. When we got back into my room, everybody went quiet. They could tell by our faces that we were not joking. Ethan held up his phone and said he had an incoming call while we were in the service hallway. It was time-stamped, and there was no number. The screen showed a blank where a number should have been. Nicole even looked pale, and I realized she was not enjoying this. We tried to calm ourselves down by blaming each other, which is what people do. We said someone must have been messing with us. Someone must have planted something. Someone must have poured some water. Someone must have found a way to do that voice. But that doesn't make complete sense. We couldn't figure out how wet, bare footprints could appear and go up a wall. We couldn't figure out where the water smell in the service hallway came from. We could not figure out the handprints. People left after that. Nobody wanted to keep drinking or keep playing anything. Later that night, after the room was quiet and Ethan was sleeping, I heard footsteps above us. We were on the second floor. The footsteps were slow, not stomping. They moved back and forth, covering the same stretch over and over. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting my breath because I didn't want to move. At some point, I felt something touch my wrist. It was cold, damp. I sat up so fast that I nearly fell off the bed. But there was nothing there. The next morning, I went to the library. I just didn't know what else to do. I ended up in a section that had old campus planning documents and local history junk. I didn't even know our library had that until I started wandering. I had a binder that had maps and project summaries from campus expansion. I flipped through it until I saw a map that showed the area where the dorm had been built. It had a note on it, small and bland, that made my stomach drop. Former settlement site. Cleared. Relocated. There were no details or notes about what relocated meant. I do not know who lived here before us, but I do know that after reading that, I could smell that mud smell again, the one from the service hallway, so I left the library. I put in a transfer to get out of that dorm at the end of the year. As far as I know, plenty of people have stayed there and never had a problem. And most folks probably think that legend is funny and not real. But I believe it. The Echo of a Man, from Somnians. I lost my left hand when I was a kid. I say lost because it's the easiest way to put it without having to explain the whole story every time. It was an accident, and it was stupid, and it was fast, and it changed everything forever. I'm fine now. I've been doing two-handed jobs with one hand for most of my life, so I'm not here for sympathy. But it matters to this story because it affects what I notice and what I don't. And yes, it does take a while to write something like this up. I work at Aldi. I've worked there long enough that most things feel automatic for me. I know where everything is without thinking and what noises are normal. like when the freezer is about to throw a fit, or the way the floor squeaks when you walk on it after it's been mopped. I also know how people act when they come in and want to steal something. I know how people act when they come in because they're lonely or want somewhere warm. This happened 3 years ago. I still think about it sometimes when I'm closing and the store gets that empty feeling. It was late enough that the parking lot was mostly empty and the register area felt too bright compared to the rest of the store. It was one of those super slow nights where it seems like the clock is being lazy. A couple of people had come through and grabbing milk or beer, but that was it. If you've ever worked retail, you know what I mean when I say a slow day. It's not peaceful per se, it's kind of tense in a low-grade way, because you're just waiting for something to happen or half hoping nothing does. Could be a rush 1 minute or nothing. Around that time, a man came in. He didn't come in like a normal customer. He appeared older, maybe late 50s or early 60s, hard to tell. His clothes looked like they'd been slept in, all dirty and worn down. His jacket was too big and hung off of him like it belonged to a much bigger person. His hair was long and thin. He looked relieved to come inside after a long time outside. We get people like that sometimes. I'm not saying that to be cruel, it's just true. A lot of stores have to deal with it. The managers usually want us to discourage loitering. They don't want the store turning into a hangout spot. They don't want customers feeling uncomfortable. There are policies, but the reality is you have to use judgment. If someone comes in and it looks like they might buy something, you give them a little time. If they come in and just wander around or sit down or start to act weird, you have to decide when to step in. This guy came in and moved in a straight line. He walked through the entrance. He didn't look at the seasonal junk or the carts. He headed down the first aisle like he already knew where he wanted to go. He did not glance at the checkout lanes. He did not make eye contact with me. He didn't look around the store either. He walked like he was following instructions, like a pre-planned route. I watched him for a second because he stood out. I told myself it was nothing. People come in with their heads down all the time, so I waited. A few minutes went by, then a few more. The store was empty at the time besides me, one stalker somewhere in the back half, and our manager doing something in the office. It was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigeration units and the faint music overhead. Aldi music always feels like it's being played for nobody. I kept expecting the man to come up and check out with something small. That's usually the way it goes. They grab a soda, something cheap, a snack or a loaf of bread. But this man never came to the checkout. After a while, I started thinking about the other possibility. Sometimes people come in and they steal. Sometimes they come in and just wander because it's warm and bright, and they can pretend for 10 minutes that they're a regular person doing regular shopping. I waited longer than I usually would, because I didn't want to make a big deal if he was actually buying something. I also didn't want to be that employee who jumps on someone just because they look homeless. I've seen some coworkers I will not name do that, and it always feels gross. Most of the time it escalates for no reason. But he had been in there long enough that it was feeling odd. The store wasn't big. You can't wander around in an Aldi for 20 minutes without looping around. So I got up from the register and walked out from behind the lane. I went down the aisle he had gone down. I scanned the lanes between shelves as I walked, but I didn't see him. I went farther back, toward the middle. I checked by the coolers. I checked the aisle where the bread was, and the aisle with the canned stuff. I walked past end caps and looked down each row, but the man wasn't there. I felt a little stupid. I thought maybe he had come up while I was looking away, deciding not to buy anything and left. People do that all the time. I walked back toward the front. The entrance door didn't make its usual sound, and I didn't hear it open. I didn't hear anyone around. The store still felt empty, like it was before he ever came. I got back behind the register and told myself he was just gone. I went back to staring at the lane, waiting for the next customer, thinking about what I still needed to do before close. A couple minutes passed, but then I saw him again. He came in the same way as before. Through the front doors, same speed, straight in a line down the first aisle. He didn't look at me and did not hesitate. I sat up a little straighter because my brain took a second to catch up. My first thought was, did he leave and come back in without me noticing? That is possible. I felt embarrassed a bit, thinking I might have missed him leaving in the first place. The door is very visible from the register, but you get distracted sometimes. You look down, you look at your screen, you zone out. Still, the way he entered again this time bothered me. I mean, people don't usually enter twice in a row with the same exact routine unless they're doing something, or maybe they forgot something. I watched him go down the aisle again. I told myself this time I would keep a better eye out. I still didn't want to jump to any conclusions. I'm not going to call my manager over a guy walking back in. He disappeared into the aisles again, and once more he never came to the checkout. This time I didn't wait as long. I gave it a few minutes, then I stepped out. I didn't feel angry, I just felt, I don't know, strange, uneasy. I didn't like the way he was going in the store, not making a sound, being hidden. The idea I was in here with someone else that I couldn't locate was kind of uncomfortable. I walked down the same aisle he had gone down. I got to the point where the aisle opens up into the cross aisle, and I looked left and right. I then saw him ahead of me, near the middle of an aisle. It was a quick glimpse, but it was him. Same jacket, same hair, and the same posture. He moved past the end of the aisle and out of my sight. I decided to follow. I wasn't chasing him, I was walking at a normal pace. I wanted to see where he was going, and I wanted to make sure he wasn't doing something in the back of the store that he shouldn't have been. I turned into the aisle right after he passed through. He was gone. That aisle had no customers, and it was just a straight sight line. The shelves were full height, but you can still see down it. But there was no one at the far end. He hadn't gone out the other side because I would have seen him cross the opening. I stopped and stood there, looking. This wasn't making sense. I checked the next aisle, then the one after that. I walked to the end of the aisle and looked into the cross aisle. No man, no movement, no sound. At this point, I could feel my face getting hot. I felt stupid again, but this was a different kind of stupid. It was the feeling you get when something simple should have an explanation, and you can't find one. I went back to the front and sat down behind the register. I didn't tell anyone yet. I tried to talk myself down. I must have missed him slipping into another aisle, or he doubled back. He left without me noticing, somehow, again. Maybe he was leaving through the back, even though that part wasn't open to the customers. But anxious brains invent possibilities. The store stayed empty. No customers came in for a while. The stalker was still doing his thing in the back, and I could hear boxes shifting sometimes. Besides that, it was quiet again. About an hour later, the same man came in a third time, and I kid you not, he had the exact same look, movement, direction, head down, everything. It was less like the same man coming in a third time, and more like a video being played on repeat. No alteration, no difference in the way he walked in. I was flabbergasted. This time I felt my heart quicken. I put my hand on the counter and gripped it, needing to ground myself. I watched him go, and it didn't feel real. I waited, not moving from my spot, and I sat there for several minutes. But the man never came to the checkout. Then I decided to stand up on the counter. I was desperate to know what this man was doing, how he kept getting away. He had not come back out yet. I knew that for a fact. I'd been keeping a close eye on the entrance. When I stood on that counter and got on my tiptoes, I could see over every aisle. The man was not in the store. Immediately I went to the manager, and I called out for him. When he didn't answer my call, I called out to the stalker. He was the one to come up first. For a moment he looked annoyed. Not at me exactly, but at the idea of extra drama late at night, when we were nearly closed. Then he saw my face, and his reaction became different. I was not calm at this time. I was trying to be calm, but something else was coming through, I'm sure of it. Without using the word ghost or glitch or anything, I began to explain to him what was going on. The manager showed up mid-explanation, so I started over. I said a guy who looked homeless kept coming in, walking down the same aisle, walking the same way, but never coming out. And it kept happening again and again and again. The manager told me to go take a smoke break. He said he would handle the register and the stalker would keep an eye out. He felt empathetic, not making fun of me, not annoyed, and that really helped me. He could tell I was rattled. I took him up on the offer. I went outside for a 15-minute smoke break. I needed the air. I know it's an oxymoron, smoking and getting air. Anyway, I stood by the side of the building where employees usually go. The parking lot was mostly empty. The rain had slowed down, but everything was wet, and the lights made the asphalt shiny. I was trying to get my breathing back to normal, trying to settle back on the idea that I was just overreacting. I kept replaying it in my head, thinking about the aisle where he vanished. How I would lose sight of him and never hear anything. No entrance, no exit, no little chime, no footsteps. This guy was either a ghost or a ninja. About 10 minutes into my break, the stalker came running outside. He looked startled. He was usually a laid-back guy, older than me. Not fearless, but not really caring about what happens. Beyond that, he's seen a lot in retail over the years. He looked me square in the eyes and said, "I saw him too. 4 times. And he never left." I stared at him, my brain wanting to reject what he just said. Eventually I replied, "Wait, what?" "The guy you described. He came in, I never saw him leave, and then he just kept coming in 3 more times." He explained how after I walked away for the break, he took over watching the store and the manager was at the register, so there were 2 sets of eyes on the store. We went back inside together. The manager was still at the register. The manager's face looked tight, or maybe tense is the better word. He asked if either of us had seen the man. We shook our heads, meaning if he was still in here, and I doubted he was, we hadn't seen him. The 3 of us searched the entire store, every aisle. We checked the back area that customers aren't supposed to go into. We checked the bathrooms, behind pallets and displays, and those weird little corners where someone could hide if they wanted to be a problem. And yet, after a full deep dive, there was no man. We finished closing like normal. There was nothing else we could do. The manager locked the doors, and we did our routine. And yet, I kept expecting the man to appear again. Thankfully, he didn't. When we left, the parking lot was still empty. Now, after all this, I don't really have a theory that makes me feel content. If he was real, a person, a human, I mean, maybe we all missed something obvious. Or maybe it was something not so human that played a trick on 3 tired employees in a bright, empty store. Never speak to them. From No Name. I worked for a certain tribal school for 6 years as a groundskeeper. It's on the reservation I grew up in. If you know anything about this part of the country, down in the Southwest, you know the land out here holds things that don't like to be talked about. My job is to keep the grounds clean and maintain the fields, fix what needs fixed up, make sure the place is clean and safe for the kids. Most of my work happens after the school day ends. The kids clear out around 3:30, the teachers trickle out by 4:30 or 5, then it's just me until I finish up. Usually takes me till around 7, but that depends heavily on the season. My favorite part of the job is the quiet. Again, I grew up here, so the desert and the tree line at the edge of the property don't bother me. Well, they didn't used to. What I'm about to tell you happened not too long ago. I've thought about sharing it since then, but I kept talking myself out of it. I didn't really feel like putting it into words. My grandmother says that talking about these things gives them power, gives them a way to find you again. And that scares the bejesus out of me. But I'll be moving soon, and I think people need to be warned. You shouldn't make the same mistake that I did. It was a Thursday when I checked the athletic equipment to make sure the basketball courts are clear of debris before the weekend. The courts are at the far east end of the school property, right where the maintained grass gives way to brush and woods. It's maybe 200 yards from the main building to the courts, and another 50 yards from the courts to the tree line. That evening, there was a mist rolling in from the hills. It happens when the temperature drops fast after a warm day. The sun was getting low, and that time of day is usually beautiful. But that night, the mist made everything feel creepy. I remember it being very, very quiet. Not even wind that night. It was so quiet, I heard nothing but my ears ringing. I was picking up trash near the bleachers when I saw it. I thought it was a kid. There was a small shape stepping out from the tree line, about 30 yards into the mist. A silhouette, really. I couldn't make out much more detail than that. Just this outline of what looked to be a child. Small, probably the size of a 7 or 8-year-old kid. I was thinking that one of the students had stayed behind and wandered off. I've had kids hide in the bathroom after school hours. Some have snuck off and fallen asleep, waking up well after the day had ended. They're often confused when everyone's gone. So I didn't panic. I set down my trash bag and started walking toward the courts. I called out to it. "Hey, what are you doing out there?" The silhouette reacted to my words, stopping instantly. I kept going. "School's over, buddy. You need to come back. I can call someone to pick you up." And then it laughed. I could never describe that sound in a way that makes you truly understand it, but I can say it was like a kid's laugh, a bit high-pitched and light, but it bounced around like it was coming from everywhere, from the woods, from behind me, from inside my own head. And underneath that laugh was something else, like a second, lower sound that reminded me of breathing or growling. Every hair on my body stood up. I stopped walking. I even stopped breathing for a moment. Because at that second, I remembered every story my grandmother ever told me, every warning from my elders, all the pieces of folklore I'd brushed off as superstition when I was younger, when I thought I knew better than everyone else. You don't speak to them. You do not acknowledge them. You don't give them your attention, because your attention is an invitation. And I had just called out to it, twice. The silhouette stood there for another few seconds. I couldn't see its face, couldn't see anything but that small dark shape against the gray mist. Then, slowly, it turned and walked back into the woods. I stood frozen until it disappeared completely into the trees. When I could finally move again, I walked back to the main building as quickly as I could. I had about an hour left on my shift. I spent it inside the building, finding busy work in the hallways and the gym. I mopped floors that didn't need any more mopping, and I checked locks that were already locked. Anything I could do to stay inside, stay in the light, stay away from the windows that faced the tree line. The whole time I felt watched. You can call it paranoia, but it felt more like knowing, like I knew something was coming or waiting. By the time 7 p.m. came around, the sun was almost completely down. The parking lot had one working light, and it barely covered a quarter of the gravel lot. My stupid self had parked the truck near the far end. I always leave the closer spots for teachers and visitors to be nice, but that day I regretted it. I walked to my truck with my keys in hand. I didn't dare look at the tree line. I kept my eyes straight ahead. I got to my truck door, unlocked it, and climbed in. Then I pulled the door shut behind me. And the second I did that, something landed on the roof of my truck. The entire vehicle rocked. The impact was so hard I thought the roof might cave in. I yelled, and I slammed my hand down on the lock button so hard I thought I broke it. Then the other sounds started. Scraping, clawing sounds, like something with long, hard nails trying to dig through the metal above my head. I could hear it moving and shifting its weight, dragging something sharp across the roof in long strokes. It wasn't frantic. It was steady, just working its way through. I couldn't even move. I sat there with my hands locked on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, too scared to even turn my head. I thought about just starting the truck and flooring it, but I couldn't even move my hands towards the ignition. Then I thought about my phone. Could I call someone? What could they even do? And wouldn't that require further acknowledgement? Suddenly, the scraping stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing, just silence and my own breathing. Then I heard it move to the front of the truck. The hood dipped slightly under its weight. It was right there, right on the other side of the windshield, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. Just a shape, a mass. I squeezed my eyes shut. I couldn't help it. I didn't want to see it. I was just too scared. I was shaking so hard that now I was shaking the truck. Or maybe it was still the thing moving. I couldn't tell. Suddenly, it jumped. I heard it leave the hood with a sound like a coiled spring releasing. My eyes flew open just in time to see something land in the gravel about 20 feet ahead of my truck. It was lit for a moment by the distant parking lot light. Primarily what I saw were legs. Legs that were extremely long and thin, unrealistically so, bent backward, like an exaggerated version of dogs' legs. They were much too thin and bony looking to even be able to walk. And yet it moved, bounding and leaping and covering ground faster than anything I'd seen move at that size. It was gone into the darkness in less than 2 seconds. I sat in that truck for about 20 minutes before I could make myself turn the key. I drove home, going 20 over, and I kept every light in the cab on. When I got home, I didn't get out of the truck until my brother came outside to see why I was just sitting in the driveway. I told him I was okay, but I didn't tell him what happened, not until after I went to see my grandmother the following day. I asked her to pray with me, and she knew without having to ask. I still work at that school. It's not a job I can afford to quit, but I don't stay past sundown anymore. And I never stare towards the tree line for too long. Some things don't need your attention, and some things, once you give it to them, don't forget. What the heck was this? From Boss M.O. I'm a firefighter. Last August, in the middle of a bad fire year, we'd just come back from 9 straight days on a Type 2 assignment. The other 3 guys on my crew were out cold by 9 p.m., sprawled in the bunk room at our suppression crew station in Northern California. I've never been able to sleep right after a deployment. Too much adrenaline and too many days of irregular hours. So I was sitting in the kitchen with the lights off, scrolling through my phone and drinking water. My way of winding down. The 2-bay garage was open to the night, because it always was in the summer. The building doesn't have AC, and the bays turn into ovens otherwise. Around 11:30, I heard something from the garage. It sounded like a whisper. Specifically, it sounded like someone going, "Psst," like someone was trying to get my attention. I figured one of the guys had woke up and actually needed my attention on the down low. So I walked through the doorway into the first bay. Both engines were sitting there, gear hung on the racks, everything in their place. The garage door was open to the night, and I could see the gravel apron and the tree line beyond. Psst. It came from outside, just around the corner of the building, past where the floodlight reaches. I stepped out onto the apron. The air was still smoky from the fires to the north. I couldn't see anyone. "Hello?" I said, not too loud, but to be honest, I'm not sure why I was keeping my voice down out here. There was nothing at first, until, "Psst, over here." Now, it sounded like words, and yet it did not sound like speech. Imagine how a lyrebird mimics noises. It can sound like an almost perfect imitation, but you can tell that it doesn't come from the actual source. That's the best I can do to describe it. It was coming from the far corner of the building where the brush starts. I walked toward it, and everything I noticed was dead silent. I was about 15 feet from the corner when something moved in the brush ahead. Something big enough that the bushes parted and swayed like something heavy had just passed through. I stopped walking. I could hear it settling in there, branches creaking, and then it went still. "Psst, over here." The sound came from inside the brush, about 10 feet from me, low to the ground, but not low enough. Whatever was making that sound, it was right there, hidden, waiting, and wanting me to come closer. Never in my life has every hair on my body stood up all at once, but it did then. And every cell that made me up was screaming at me not to run, but to go back inside calmly as I could. So I started to back up, one step at a time, never turning around, until I hit the gravel apron and the floodlight was on me again. Then I went inside and pulled down the garage doors, and I sat in the kitchen until sunrise. Later on, I told the guys about this, but they joked about it and poked fun at me for getting scared of a mountain lion or a bear. Doesn't matter. I don't sit in the kitchen with the garage doors open at night anymore. A series of stories from Rosie's Choices. I got myself into babysitting and got really popular among the neighborhoods. All the popular parks, clubs, and local stores. I usually get evening calls for parents who need a night out, but occasionally I get called during the days. Here are some stories I've collected. I babysat a little one that I'll call Alex. Alex was a toddler and didn't know how to speak clearly yet. It was during the day and they woke up from their afternoon slumbers. We decided to go to the park. Fortunately for us, there were other children Alex's age at the park. We took some toys and the children were having fun. This park was a cute little place, just down the street from the house. I like to use this park whenever I babysit in the area. This park is divided by a standard metal fence, like the ones you see in the baseball batting cages. On the other side of that was a house. The first few times we went there, I didn't think much of the house. Maybe that I'd hate all the park noise sometimes, if I'd lived there. The more I sat across from that house, the more it creeped me out though. I didn't say anything to anyone about that. If I talked to a parent, it's just playground banter. If it's with kids, it's sandbox banter. There was a small window on the top floor of the house. The lights were always off there, or at least very dimly lit. You could almost see the dark wallpaper with a few picture frames on the walls. On that day, Alex was happily throwing a ball against the fence. I was encouraging them to throw the ball higher. They were trying, then suddenly stopped. Slowly, they looked up at the window and pointed, then began to cry. I held them and consoled them, trying to figure out what happened. The window that they pointed at, there was nothing there. That room was dark. The crying started to worsen, so I carried them to the bench to go somewhere else, to get away from the house. Other parents also saw the sudden stop and pointing. They came over and told me that that house always creeped them out too. But admittedly, they didn't want to sound crazy, so they hadn't said anything until now. One other nanny came with us to a local children's store to look at some toys and books. She told me to be careful. Kids are more vulnerable to certain things. We never know how, if, or when they'll come into contact with unexplainable things. I worked at a private residence for the first time. I was there for a week to cover their sitter's vacation. They were coming back from a family trip and asked me to come in the day before to collect the keys and get a tour. I met the house manager. She showed me the routine, the nursery, and the child's bedroom. This particular family was very detailed and had a routine. I felt very unsettled for some reason, but I blamed it on nerves. But even that was odd for me because I've babysat for ages, and I usually didn't get nervous like this. We stood by the doorway of the nursery. She asked me, "How are you feeling so far? Are you getting it?" I replied, "Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward. I think I've got it. Guess I'm just a little nervous at a new house." "No, it's definitely the house. This particular part of the house is worse. You'll see," she replied. "Oh, can't wait," I laughed. Then she stopped me. "To put it bluntly, there's like this old man spirit here. He's grumpy, but he loves kids, never harms kids. But the adults he likes to bother. He might play some tricks on you." She looked at me intently. I looked back, waiting for the joke to reveal itself. But she was serious. I laughed anyway. "I haven't noticed anything yet. I guess he's feeling me out so far, huh?" We both smirked a little, and I said my goodbyes before leaving. When my first shift started, I did what was on the agenda: to set up the nursery for maximum exploration. It was such a beautiful morning. As I was pulling up the blinds, a toy on the opposite side of the room fell on the floor from a shelf. I looked around and even poked my head outside the door. No one there. I noticed, too, that the lights often flickered, which was odd considering it was a newer house. When I asked the housekeeper and the chef, they mentioned things like that often happened in that particular part of the house. They said I should be thankful it's only a week-long contract. Experiencing toy dropping, things going missing, and lights flickering was enough for a lifetime. A friend of mine needed to leave for a while for a personal emergency, and I stayed over to take care of their kids in their house for a bit. The oldest took care of themselves, and the youngest was 3 and full of energy. The grandparents came over for the weekends. They gave me the weekend to settle in since this was very last minute, and the grandparents didn't have the energy to do it for that long. They went out for the day, and they said they may come back late. I've known this 3-year-old since he was in the mommy's tummy. I've hit the auntie status. He was so excited that I would be staying with him. This was during the winter time. It got dark before 6 p.m. I was listening to a podcast, settling into my bedroom. I had the door open, and in the corner of my room I saw a shadow running into the closet. I snuck in and said, "Boo!" but there was no one in there. I walked out of the room and walked around the house. There wasn't anyone home. I haven't told my friends to this day, and I haven't taken any babysitting gigs for them at their house. When the walls of your work speak. From Anonymous. When it comes to Wendigos, Skinwalkers, and paranormal activity, I think they attach themselves to those who are more sensitive to that stuff. But I haven't had too many experiences with them. I work for a company in an office building downtown in a busy city. We have a small team of workers, so we get along pretty well. With how our office is set up, I ended up in an office with a walk-in storage closet, while most of the others had smaller closets. I let a few people use my closet as I didn't need all that space. I also have a open door policy as long as I'm not in a meeting, and I lock up all the important files. As a note, these names have been changed for anonymity. Kyle is the type of person who could easily make people laugh. A few years ago, he started to pull little pranks, and we pay it back to him. Nothing that would hurt someone, though. Even our boss gets into it. Kyle is one of the few who keeps some of his work items in my closet. During winters, when it gets dark early, I only turn on yellow light lamps, because office lights tend to give me a headache. One night while we were getting ready to leave, I had my back against the door, while some of my colleagues were putting stuff away in my closet. I heard this little giggle that sounded like Kyle. I turned around, saying, "Kyle, what are you up to in there? You better not be messing up my closet." I didn't hear anything, so I went in the closet and no one was there. I chalked it up to Kyle possibly talking nearby my office somewhere. As I was closing my closet, in the corner of my eye, I saw this shadow run out of my office. This shadow was too clear to be mistaken for my eyes playing tricks. I looked out of my office and there was only Sarah, who was at the end of the hallway locking up her office. She saw me as she began to walk down. She asked, "Are you okay?" Did you see Kyle? I think he's playing with me," I said with a laugh. "Oh, he left a little early today." "Why, what did he do?" she asked with a smile, like she suspected another prank story. "Really? I don't want to sound crazy, but what? What happened?" She sounded concerned now. "I heard a giggle in my closet. It sounded like him. Then this shadow ran out. That's why I poked my head out of my office just now. I thought I'd see him," I said. She looked at me like she didn't really believe me, then said, "Probably Light's playing tricks on you, or he's gotten you on edge. But no, he's not here right now." She waited for me to grab my bags and we left together. A few weeks later, I went to our community workstation with an armful of stuff and forgot my ID badge, which works as a card key to enter certain areas of the office. I asked Kyle, who was walking past my office at the moment, if he could grab my badge from my desk for me. He came out and told me that it wasn't there. At first, I thought he was playing around and laughed. "Kyle, are you being serious?" He replied, "Yeah, there's no badge on your desk. All seriousness." I went back and it really wasn't on my desk. I remember taking it off to readjust my clothes and leaving it on my desk. I checked my bags, the floor, my drawer, the closet, my jacket pockets, and retraced my steps where I'd been in my office. I know it had to be in my office somewhere. I had just used it before this. I couldn't find it all morning, so I let management know it had gotten lost. Everyone asked Kyle if he took it, and he said he really hadn't touched it, and that he wouldn't go as far as to ruin someone else's work, which is true. He hasn't done anything that could jeopardize people's work. For the rest of the day, I'd been locking my office door whenever I left. A few of us went out for lunch, and when I went back to my desk, it was sitting exactly where I'd left it when I first took it off. I asked the office manager, Candace, if she or our boss dropped it off while we were out. She said that no one had been in my office since we left, at least not to her knowledge. But she was in the bullpen since we left, and no one went in. Candace and our boss would be the only ones who would have the key to my office. I told Sarah and Kyle about where I found it. They seemed genuinely as dumbfounded as I was, because we were looking for it together. About a week after that, I noticed how things shifted around my office. Except it's not just my office. Others were experiencing it as well. I've been in this company and this office long enough to know all the normal sounds that it makes. It started with a pile of folders behind me. It slid as if something bumped into it when nothing had. Things would fall off the shelves in my closet when they never had before. A coworker I share a wall with, it once sounded like he threw something or punched the wall we shared. When I went to check in on him, his shelf had fallen, and a few things fell that made those sounds out of the blue. Sarah and Kyle also mentioned how some things are always slightly off. Kyle accused us jokingly that we moved his stapler under his desk as a joke, when we hadn't. Sarah mentioned she would find her lunch bag under her desk all the time, when she normally places it on the counter behind her. We thought it was just one-off experiences, or that we were pulling jokes on each other. But now we are experiencing things together still, like sometimes we hear tapping on our walls, as if someone is knocking on our door, or someone is moving stuff around us. We often get college interns or high school students as volunteers. It's not weird to get assigned interns every college semester. On my intern Fiona's first day, she was brought to my office around 9 a.m. After we got acquainted, I gave her a desk in my office, and we went on a tour. I noticed she was quiet, maybe shy in nature. I didn't think too much of it when she didn't say much, as I'm also an introvert. I can be a person of few words sometimes. I assigned her to read over our manual. I noticed she kept her jacket and her backpack on the whole time. I told her she was welcome to get comfortable. She could hang her jacket in my closet. It's relatively safe, I told her. She could use a locking drawer as her locker too, and she said she was fine. A while later, she told me that she was done with our manual. I gave her easy first day tasks, mostly to get her familiar with the office layout. One of those tasks was to take some documents to the boss's office, which was at the other end of the office. After about 10 to 15 minutes, I didn't see her. I called my boss and asked if she got there all right to drop off the documents. He said that he got them about 10 minutes ago. I texted and called her, but there wasn't a response. I decided to take a walk around the office, in case she'd gotten herself lost. I was talking to one of my colleagues when I noticed Fiona turning into the hallway to the washroom and emergency staircase. I excused myself and headed to that hallway. When I got closer, I called her name. "Fiona!" I didn't get a response. I opened the emergency exit door. I didn't hear anyone on the staircase, but I still called out again. "Fiona!" Still no response. I was heading back to the hall to check the washroom when I saw her coming out of the washroom. "Hey, Fiona!" She didn't even flinch or turn. She just turned toward the corner away from my office. When I also turned the corner, she wasn't there anymore. There wasn't anywhere she could go from there other than other offices. If she wanted to leave, she'd need to wait for the elevators. Kyle, who was standing in front of his office, asked what I was doing. "Have you seen Fiona, my intern? She's wearing her jacket and her bag still," I asked. "Yeah, I saw her turn the corner and I haven't seen her since," he said jokingly. "Did you make her feel so miserable that she just left?" "Ha ha, Kyle," I said while going back to my office. I approached Candace. "Did you see Fiona, my intern?" "I saw her going into the kitchen. I followed her in there to show her how the kitchen works. But when I went in, she wasn't there. And I swear I saw her going in, but not coming out." She looked at me, puzzled. There's only one way in and out of that kitchen. Candace is really strict about how organized and clean our work kitchen is. If anyone even breathes towards the kitchen, Candace would know about it. So I know she was as lost as I was about it. I put a work blast out, asking to direct my intern towards me when they saw her. A few minutes later, Candace came in, saying that her school had contacted us. She was out of her intern program. The receptionist said she signed out without saying anything or making eye contact. Sarah also mentioned how she would see her one second and not the next when we were talking about how strange it was. Our office is a big rectangle with a small hallway with the washroom and emergency exit. A person would have to deliberately sneak around to be hidden like that. I understand that all these could have logical reasoning or seem fake, but these are just some weird experiences among many, or you just have to be there to experience it. I'm only sharing because I ran out of logical explanations. My DoorDash creep, from Whale Shell, 19X. I started doing DoorDash about 2 years ago to make some extra money on top of my usual job. I would usually dash in the evenings after work, about 3 or 4 nights a week, depending on how I feel. I know my area pretty well at this point, which restaurants are fast and which ones will have you waiting 20 minutes for a sealed bag. And I know which neighborhoods tip well. I'm not saying this to brag about it, but to tell you that when something feels off in my routine, I notice it pretty quick. I had just started picking up more shifts leading into the holidays. I got this order around 8:30 p.m. for a Thai place I pick up from regularly. Good restaurant, usually quick, The order itself was normal, about $40 worth of food. The delivery address was in a neighborhood I'd been to a handful of times, some older apartments. Not sketchy though, just quiet. When I pulled up, the building didn't have much great lighting out front. The instructions said to come to the third floor and hand it to them directly. I don't love hand-it-to-me orders at night, but it's part of the job. I grabbed the bag and went up. The hallway on the third floor was dim. None of the lights were broken or missing. They were just all super dim, and the place smelled like old carpet. I got to the door and began to knock. There was no response at all for about 30 seconds. So I knocked again. I could hear movement inside now, like someone shuffling, but still no one came to the door. I was about to just leave it and take a photo when the door opened maybe 4 inches. They didn't have a chain, I noticed. They just cracked it open barely enough to see a sliver of face. It was a man, seemed to be in his mid-40s. He didn't say a word. He stared at me through that little crack. "Hey, I've got your DoorDash order," I said, holding the bag back up. He didn't reach for it, but he did keep staring. At me, not the bag. After what felt like ages, but was probably 5 seconds, he opened the door a little wider and took the bag without a word. He didn't close the door right away either. I said, "Have a good night," and I turned around and began to walk back down the hallway. But even then, I could still feel that he was standing there. I didn't want to look back. I got in my car and left. I rated the delivery as weird in my head and moved on. That's the thing about this job. You meet all kinds of people, and most of the awkward ones are just socially off. It doesn't always mean more than that. About a week later, I was doing a delivery in a completely different part of town. I had just dropped off an order at a house and was walking back to my car when I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street with its headlights off. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat though. I could tell. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, except that when I pulled away, the sedan pulled out behind me. Coincidence, I hoped. It followed me though for about 6 turns before I told myself I was being paranoid again, and it turned off. But this happened again about 3 days later. It was a different neighborhood, the same dark sedan though. I was picking up from a burger place, and when I came out with the order, I saw it parked in the lot. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but someone was in there. I did my delivery and even took a weird route home, turning randomly through side streets. I didn't see the car again that night, but something in my gut wouldn't let me relax. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw that sedan at least 5 more times, always during my dashes, always parked somewhere nearby, but never directly behind me for long. It was like whoever it was knew my general area, but not my exact route. So I started changing things up, like when and where I dashed. I'd skip nights or drive to a zone 20 minutes away. For a few days, I didn't see it, and thought maybe I'd been overthinking it. But then I came home one night after a shift, and my apartment door was unlocked. But I know I locked it before I left. I always lock it. I live alone, and locking the door is just automatic to me. I stood in the doorway for a minute and listened. Nothing. I walked through every room slowly, checking the closets, checking behind the shower curtain, but there was no one there. However, things were slightly off. A drawer in my kitchen was open about an inch. One of my couch cushions was shifted too, and my bedroom window, which I never opened, was now unlocked. Sure, none of it was dramatic enough to call the police over. Nothing was missing or broken, but I knew someone had been in my apartment. I decided to install a cheap camera inside my apartment the next day. I pointed it at the front door. I also began writing down every time I saw the sedan, the date, the time, the location, and anything else I could note. I told my friend Maddie about everything. He said I should go to the police anyway, but still I felt like I'd be wasting their time, like I didn't have enough evidence. At this point, it was just a car I kept seeing, and an unlocked door one time. They would think I was losing it. 2 days after the camera went up, I checked the footage after a shift. There it was. About 2 hours into my dash, someone opened my front door, walked in, and stood in my living room for about a minute before walking back out. The camera quality wasn't that great, but it was clearly a man, average build, wearing a hoodie and a ball cap. He didn't take anything. He seemed to just stand there and look around for a moment. It was like he was checking if I was home, and he looked comfortable doing it. I went to the police that night. I showed them the footage, my notes, and everything, and they took my report. They told me they'd look into it, and to call if anything escalated. They also told me to consider changing my locks, which I did the next morning. But honestly, their response did not make me feel much safer. A report is just paper. I kept door dashing, but truthfully, I was on edge every single night. I would check my mirrors all the time. I would sit in my car for a few minutes before going inside, watching the street. The sedan showed up twice more over the next week. Once near a Chick-fil-A I pick up from a lot, and once parked on my street. On my street. That made me feel very sick. I called the police again about the car being on my street. They sent someone to patrol the area, and by the time they got there, the car was long gone. I followed up on the report twice, but nothing came of it. There were no leads or plates they could run, nothing they could do. I had to break my lease to move to a different apartment across town the following month. I didn't tell anyone the new address except Maddie and my family. I changed my dashing zones completely, and I stopped dashing at night for a long time, only doing lunch shifts on weekends. It felt like I was starting over, and I hated that. I was angry about it. It's been about 5 months now, and I have yet to see the sedan again. I haven't had any signs of someone being in my apartment either. I did eventually go back to evening dashes, just in different areas. I don't know who this guy was, or what his problem with me was, but I'm glad it's over, for now. The most unsettling man I've ever met. From Piece of Reese. I'm going to keep this vague on purpose. I won't be naming the facility, the state, or the man. People I work with know this story, and they'll know it's me writing this. But I'm not putting details out there that could come back on my career. I've been in corrections for going on 11 years, county level, and after that much time you see a lot, and you've heard a lot. Most of it you forget because you have to. But this one I can't forget, even though I've tried. We process a high volume of people. DUIs, domestics, warrants, the usual rotation. You learn real fast not to take anything personally in here. These guys will say the worst things imaginable to you because they're angry and drunk and sometimes scared. But it rolls off. That's the job. But every now and then you get someone who unsettles you in a way that has nothing to do with what they did on the outside. It's something about how they carry themselves on the inside. He came in on a Tuesday night. I was working intake. The charge was aggravated assault, which we get plenty of, so nothing about the booking stood out on paper. Arresting officers brought him in, and he seemed cooperative. He was polite even. That's not unusual either. Plenty of people are calm during booking because the adrenaline is gone and reality is setting in. But this wasn't the same as that. He wasn't calm like someone defeated. He was cozy, even. Like he'd been there before, except he hadn't. He didn't have any priors. I ran him myself to check. During processing, he made small talk. He asked me how long I'd been doing this, and if I liked it. Normal enough questions, but he asked them more like my doctor asking if it hurts. As if he already had some idea and wanted to see if I'd confirm it. I gave him short answers and moved him along. he looked me right in the eyes the entire time. There was no ounce of anger or hatred or anything. He just locked in, like he was trying to read me. A little weird, but fine. When I walked him to his holding cell, he said to me, "You're gonna have a rough time tonight. Not because of me. Someone on B block is going to give you problems around 2:15. A medical issue. You should check on him before that." He said it so casually, like telling me the weather's gonna get bad or that there's traffic on the highway. I said something like, "All right, thanks for the heads up." I was being sarcastic. At about 2:10, an inmate on B block had a seizure. He'd never had a seizure before in his life, nothing in his medical history. I wasn't even on B block. I heard it on the radio. I stood there for a second and felt every hair on my arms stand up. Then I told myself it had to be a coincidence. People have medical emergencies in here all the time. There's no way a man in a holding cell on the other end of the facility would know about this. I put it out of my mind, or I tried to. He was with us for a few days before his hearing. In that time, I interacted with him maybe 4 or 5 more times. Beyond the weirdness, he was a model detainee. No issues with other inmates or with staff. He followed every instruction immediately, but he talked. Not excessively and not loud, he'd just say things that made you stop for half a second too long. I was doing a routine check and he was sitting on his bunk, hands in his lap, totally relaxed. He said then, "How's the daughter doing with the new school?" I don't wear a ring, I don't have photos on me, I have never once discussed my personal life with any inmate ever. I have a daughter, and at the time she had transferred schools about 3 weeks before this. I didn't respond. I kept walking. My hands were shaking a bit, and I was angry. I told my sergeant about the comment. He said the guy probably overheard staff talking or got information from another inmate who knew someone who knew me. That is possible. It's a small area. People talk. But it didn't feel like that, and I couldn't really explain why. The next day I was escorting him to a meeting with his attorney. He was cooperative as usual, walking ahead of me, and out of nowhere he said, "Davis is gonna quit, by the way. Probably by Friday." Davis was a newer CO, a young kid who seemed like he was adjusting fine. He hadn't had any complaints, and we didn't have any of him. I just ignored him, not responding to the comment. Thursday evening, Davis put in his resignation. When someone asked why, he said he'd been thinking about it for a while, and just couldn't do it anymore. He hadn't told anyone he was considering it. Word started to get around among the staff. A couple other COs had their own stories too. One CO said the man told him his wife was going to call him during the shift with good news. And she did, about an hour later. She had gotten a job offer. Another CO said the man told him to drive safe on Wednesday because of black ice. And that officer ended up hitting a patch on his way home that night, nearly crashing into a ditch. And what gets me is the guy isn't like some kind of mystic sitting there being cryptic and spiritual about it. He was witty and sharp, and he would say these things with a little smirk. He'd work them into normal conversation like it was some joke. If you didn't know any better, you'd think he was just a clever guy making lucky guesses. But the accuracy was too consistent, and the details were often too specific. One evening I was doing final count and I stopped at his cell. He was lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Without looking at me, he said, "You're a good man. That's going to make the next few years harder for you than it has to be." I stood there for a while. I so badly wanted to ask what he meant. But I didn't. I then kept on walking. He made bail 2 days later. He walked out as cooperative as he was when he went in, and he was still just as polite. He thanked the processing officer, collected his belongings, and he was gone. I looked up his case a few times after that. The assault charge got pled down. He got probation. He never did come back through our facility. As far as the system is concerned, he's just another name in the database. Eventually, I would tell this story to my wife. She's a nurse and has always been very practical. She said some people are just extremely perceptive and can read micro-expressions, body language, and patterns. A cold reading, she called it. That thing fake psychics would do on TV to impress people. And I get that. And I've thought about that explanation a lot. I mean, it could cover half of it, but it doesn't cover knowing about a seizure on a different block an hour before it happened. And it doesn't cover knowing a CO's wife got a job offer that the CO himself hadn't even known about yet. I've been doing this long enough that I don't spook easily. You can't. This job will eat you alive if you let every strange moment get to you. But I have never encountered anyone like that before or since. It wasn't that he knew things he shouldn't know. That alone I could maybe rationalize. But this man enjoyed it. It was amusing to him. Amusing like small talk. A way to pass the time, telling us these things and watching how we might react. And I still haven't forgotten about the being a good man will make things harder thing he said. Has he been right so far? Well, I'm not going to get into that, because I don't even know yet. You might find this man amazing, but I personally never want to see him again. The Pullover, from Ananya. I work about 40 minutes outside the town I live in. Most of my drive is a 2-lane rural highway. For long stretches at a time, there might be no streetlights at all. I pass a few farms, a gas station that closes at 9, and that's about it. I've probably driven through here over 100, maybe even 1,000 times by now. It was around 10:30 p.m. I'd stayed late to finish something up. There was almost nobody on the road at the time, which is normal for that time. About halfway through the drive, though, I noticed headlights behind me. They'd come up pretty fast and were now sitting close to me. They weren't tailgating me yet, but they were closer than you'd expect on an empty road when they could easily just pass. Then the lights started to flash, red and blue, mounted behind the grille. I thought, great, maybe I was going a little fast and didn't notice. I slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder. The car pulled in behind me. I turned on my interior light, and I put the window down, grabbing my license. I sat there waiting. The car just sat there too, the lights still flashing but nobody getting out. After maybe a minute, I started to watch my mirrors more carefully. The car wasn't a cruiser. There was no light bar on top and no markings I could see. It looked like a regular dark SUV with those grille-mounted lights you can buy online. That was the first thing I thought was wrong. Then a figure stepped out. A figure with no uniform, just dark clothes. They had a flashlight and they were shining it low, walking slow. Not the way an officer approaches a vehicle. There was no radio chatter and no spotlight. Just a person walking toward me with his flashlight. My stomach dropped. I looked at the road ahead of me, and then I saw them. There was someone standing on the right side of the road about 50 yards ahead of where I'd pulled over. Just standing there on the edge of the tree line. I could barely make them out, because they appeared to be trying to hide, but the silhouette was clear enough in my headlights. I made a quick decision then. I put my window up, put the car back in drive, and pulled off the shoulder. I heard the person behind me shout something, but I was going. I did not look back at them, but as I passed where the man was hiding in the woods, something hit my car. I think he threw something at me. I floored it and didn't ease off the gas until I was back in town. I called the police when I got home, and they verified that that was not one of theirs. They sent someone out, but didn't find anyone or any vehicle on that stretch. They told me I did the right thing by leaving, and that if someone pulls me over and it doesn't feel right, I'm within my rights to drive to a well-lit public area. The officer I spoke with said they'd had similar reports on rural roads in the county before. These days I take a different route. It's a little longer, but I don't care. I'm not about to be ambushed by some freaks on the road again. I'm a daycare worker. There's something wrong with one of the kids. From JCL. As a daycare worker, you love your kids, especially the longer you're around them. But there's something that happened over the course of a few months that I still can't make sense of. We had this little girl in our program named Nora. She was 3 when she started. She was a very sweet kid, very imaginative. She talked a mile a minute, and her mom was great. She was always on time for pickup and packed good lunches, always asking how Nora's day was with actual interest. It seemed like a normal, loving family, at least from everything I could see. Now, Nora had a habit of talking to herself during free play. Nothing crazy for her age. Kids often have imaginary friends, they might narrate what they're doing, or even have full conversations with just stuffed animals. That's healthy, normal stuff. But after a few weeks, I started to notice that Nora's conversations had a consistency to them that stood out. It wasn't babbling. She would talk about specific things, and she left spaces for responses, and she would laugh at things that no one said. She'd set out 2 plates during pretend kitchen, always 2, and say, "Here you go, Callie." I asked her once during snack time, "Who's Callie, sweetheart?" "My sister," she said. I didn't think much beyond that. Nora was an only child according to our information. Kids invent siblings all the time. I just said, "Oh, that's nice," and I went on with my day. Over the next few weeks, Callie came up more and more. Nora would get upset if another child sat in a specific chair at her table, because that's where Callie sits. During nap time, she'd scoot over on her mat and whisper. One afternoon, I heard her say, "Callie, stop, you're cold." She didn't seem scared, just annoyed. My coworker, Diane, noticed it too. She mentioned that Nora had told her Callie doesn't go home with her, that Callie stays here. That's when the weird feeling about this whole situation started. Imaginary friends usually follow their kid everywhere. This one apparently lived at the daycare. I brought it up casually with Nora's mom at pickup one day. I said Nora had been playing with an imaginary friend named Callie, and that I thought it was quite cute. But her mom's face did something I can't fully describe. It didn't fall exactly, but it kind of froze. She recovered quick and smiled, saying, "Oh, she's got quite the imagination." She changed the subject to what Nora had for lunch and left. It was fast. Too fast. I let it go. It wasn't my place to push. Things got stranger after that. Not with Nora, but with the daycare itself. Toys would be out in the morning when I opened up, and I don't mean messed up or scattered. They appeared carefully placed, as if a kid had been playing with them and left them out neatly. There would be a few crayons on the table, a picture book open on the floor, the toy kitchen set with a pot on the little stove. I assumed the closing staff just missed them during cleanup, but when I asked, they swore everything was put away. Our closing checklist is thorough. Every bin gets checked, every surface gets wiped. This happened 3 times in 1 week, and by the 3rd time I began to take photos of how I left the room at close, comparing them to what I found in the morning. Things were being moved. I knew for sure now. Diane started to feel uneasy too. She told me that during nap time one afternoon, she counted the kids on the mats and got 21. She counted again and got 20. She said she was probably just tired, but she looked rattled telling me about it. Then there was the night that changed everything for me. We had a parent event one evening. A sort of open house, so families could see the classroom and meet each other. It wrapped up around 7:30. Afterwards, I stayed behind to clean up and reset the room. Diane had already left. The building was empty at the time. I had the lights on in the main room and the hallway, but the rest of the building was dark. I was wiping down tables when I heard a giggling sound from the hallway that leads to the bathrooms. It was clearly a child's laugh. Clear and close, no mistaking it. Someone was in the building with me. I stopped and listened, but I didn't hear anything else just yet. I told myself it had to just be pipes or the building settling somehow, maybe my brain playing tricks. I went back to cleaning, but then I heard it again, this time closer, right around the corner. I walked to the hallway. The lights were on, but the bathroom doors were open and dark inside. I looked down the hall. There was nobody there, but the air felt different, heavier even, and much colder. I turned back toward the main room, and I saw her. There was a child standing in the far corner of the classroom near the toy kitchen. A little girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old. She was standing there, facing the kitchen set, like she was in the middle of playing. She had dark hair, and she was wearing what looked like a light-colored dress, but there was something wrong. She was incredibly still, absolutely motionless. Kids that age don't sit that still. They shift and fidget and run around, but this child was motionless. I couldn't move. I stood there with a wet rag in my hand and simply stared at this child that shouldn't be there. My chest was so tight, I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Eventually, I said, "Hello?" And my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. She turned her head towards me, just her head, slowly. Her face was pale, and her eyes were open, looking right at me now. But behind those eyes there was nothing. No anger or sadness, just nothingness. I dropped the rag and grabbed my keys and my bag, and I left. I ran to my car and called Diane, telling her everything. She said to me that she believed me. The next morning I called our director, and I told her what happened. She's a kind but practical woman. She said it was probably a shadow or exhaustion from the event. I wasn't going to argue with my boss. About a week later, I looked something up that I probably shouldn't have. Nora's enrollment file had her mother's full name. I searched online for the family, and I eventually found something. An obituary from a few years before Nora was born. A baby girl, and her name was Callie. She had died at 11 months. The cause of death was not listed. I never said anything to Nora's mom, and I'm not going to. That poor woman lost a child, and whatever is happening at the daycare isn't hurting anyone. Nora's not scared. She talks to her sister like it's the most normal thing, and maybe for her it is. But even so, I'm not about to stay alone in that building anymore. I just won't. When I have to close, Diane closes with me every time now. These experiences have stopped now. Maybe it's just a gap in encounters. I am happy for Nora that she gets to see her sister. As long as Callie leaves me alone, we won't have a problem. Something lives under the town. From Anonymous. I want to be clear here. In this story, I'm not talking about rats. And I'm not talking about raccoons or possums that wander into storm drains. Those are easy to differentiate, be it in person or on camera, when we send inspection units down the line. Basically, we know how animals move in tunnels. But what I've been encountering over the past 2 years as a sewer maintenance worker is no animal. The first time was during a routine inspection of an older section of the system on the east side. These are the bigger tunnels, some of them built in the 50s and tall enough to walk through if you hunch. I was in there with my partner, checking for root intrusion. We had headlamps and a handheld spotlight. About 300 feet in, my partner stopped and said, "You hear that?" I listened for a second. There was a sound ahead of us that I can only describe as breathing. We stood there for about 10 more seconds, but then the breathing stopped. Ray made a joke about the city having its own Ninja Turtles situation, and we kept going. We didn't find anything unusual in the tunnel that day. But when we got back to the truck, I noticed Ray locked his doors, and that man never locks his door. A few months after that, we sent a camera down a line that had been backing up in a residential neighborhood. This was a standard CCTV inspection. I was watching the feed from the van. The camera rolled through about 600 feet of normal pipe, but then the image jerked. There was no static or interference or anything, but the camera physically moved, like something had bumped into it. The cable went taut for a second and then released. When the image stabilized, there were marks on the wall of the pipe that had not been there before in previous inspections. Long vertical scrapes in the buildup, 4 of them to be precise, like fingers dragged through. I noted this in the report as possible tool marks from prior maintenance, but I knew that it wasn't. Over the following year, I started keeping a personal log, sounds in sections of the system where there's no access point for animals to enter. A smell I'd catch occasionally that wasn't sewage. It was sour, almost acidic, and it would come and go in pockets like something had just passed through. Twice I found what I could only call nesting. Piles of debris pushed together in dry sections of larger tunnels. Rags and plastics and leaves, all mounded in a deliberate way. These were not washed together by flow. They had been arranged. The one that made me a believer happened about 6 months back. I was alone in a maintenance access chamber, doing a valve check. It's a concrete room, about 8 by 8 feet, with 2 tunnels feeding into it. I was wearing my headlamp, and I was crouched over the valve when I heard movement in the tunnel to my left. Slow and cautious sounding movement. Reminded me of someone sneaking around in shallow water. I quickly pointed my light into the tunnel. About 20 feet in, just at the edge of where the beam started to fade, I saw something pull back around the curve of the pipe. It was pale, and it moved on 2 legs. It was fast, but not panicked. It retreated, almost looking afraid. There was no sound after that. Whatever it was, it moved in near silence. Well, when it wanted to. I reported this as a possible trespasser. The city sent someone to check the access points in the area, but all were locked and all were secure. They found no sign of a forced entry or anyone living down there in the usual sense, like camps or trash or clothing. But they did point out the nesting piles I'd found before, but the inspector shrugged them off, blaming it on debris accumulation. My partner won't talk about it with me anymore. Says that if he wants to keep doing this job normally, that he doesn't want to think about it. But just last month, he requested a transfer to water treatment, and I know exactly why. He wants to get out of the sewers. No idea what's really down there, and I don't know if it's one thing or more than one. But it's bipedal, it's fast, and it's smart enough to avoid cameras and retreat from light. Scariest of all is that it's quiet and very good at hiding. Tonight's first story, the firefighter one, was pretty creepy. Short, but my favorite this episode. Reminds me of some short horror film I found back in the day, of this thing mimicking a baby's cry before eating some woman. Good stuff. Good night. Thank you so much for tuning in to Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. Make sure to follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube at the Darkness Prevails channel, and all your favorite podcast apps to help us grow. Thank you. And if you have a scary work-related story, send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. Till next time, everyone, I'll be clocking out, because if I get back home late again, my wife will destroy me, and my toddlers will nibble at my remains. So I'll be clocking out for now. But I'll be back again real soon. Hey, I'm glad you came back with some kindling for the fire, but whatever you do, do not leave the campsite. Ever since you've been gone, I've been seeing these tall, dark shapes moving between the trees. Dozens of them. Whatever they are, they seem scared of the light. I'm scared, but I think we can make it until morning if we keep the fire going. Wait. No. It's starting to rain. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can follow me on Twitter at DarkPrevails if you'd like to see a very scary trail cam video of a deer and some sort of unexplained creature or entity caught in the background. Today I've got a new set of scary camping stories to make you get the shiver shakes the next time you look into the deep, dark woods. Enjoy, and don't forget to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them on the show. And go to eeriecast.com for more creepy podcasts. Now, let's begin. I was followed by something for 4 years. From Theolite Fae. These events happened when I was between 11 and 15 years old. I had never been one to fully believe in the paranormal, but I do accept that even if I haven't seen something strange myself, it's probably out there somewhere, waiting for me to run into it. This was one of those experiences. The first encounter I had with this entity was when I was 11 years old. I was living in the Southwest United States. My friend, his dad, my dad, and I were doing an overnight campout in one of our favorite camping spots, which was located a little ways from a relatively calm river. It was secluded, but close enough to public roads we could leave quickly if we needed to. The day went smoothly, and we settled into sleep after a good hike along the river. I shared a tent with my friend, while our fathers shared another. Sleeping on campouts has always been difficult for me, so I was the last one to fall asleep. I think I fell asleep sometime around 11 p.m. I woke up in the middle of the night, suddenly. I looked at my watch. It said 2 a.m. Right away I wondered why I was awake. That's when I heard something moving around outside the tent. No problem, I thought. It's just my father or my friend's father moving around. Probably had to go relieve themselves. That thought was quickly wiped from my mind, however, as I heard the movement continue with no sound of a tent zipper or tent fabric. Naturally, as an 11-year-old with an overactive imagination, I quickly hunkered down into my sleeping bag, terrified of what it could be. That's when the entity yipped. If you're familiar with coyotes, you know they don't really howl, but they let out a series of yips and whines. This was the sound the entity made, and continued to make. A series of yips and whines followed by snuffling and more movement around the tent. Surprisingly, my friend did not wake up, nor did I hear anyone stirring about in the other tent. Whatever this thing was, it was snuffling and walking right next to the tent wall, occasionally yipping loudly. Normally, when coyotes make these calls, they're answered by other coyotes, but nothing else responded to this thing's calls or whines. Eventually, the sounds stopped though, and at some point I managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I was the first one up and out of the tents. I had to see if I could find anything that would show there was a coyote outside of the tent the previous night. I looked for anything I could think of. Paw prints, shed hair, even scat, but there was nothing within a 100-foot radius of our campsite. Not even paw prints in the soft soil near the tents, nor in the sand on the riverbank. When I asked my friend and our fathers if they had heard anything the previous night, They all replied that they had slept soundly, and they hadn't heard a thing. After another search, none of us found anything coyote-related either, though my friend did find a human footprint in the sand along the riverbank. No, it wasn't a shoe print. It was a bare human footprint. We packed up camp and left after breakfast, and nothing else of note happened. A day later, however, there was a massive summer storm. The river near the campsite flooded, completely wiping out the spot where we had camped 2 days prior. At the time, I thought this was simply a coincidence. However, my second experience with this entity changed my mind. The second experience with this thing happened about a year after the first. I was 12 years old then, still living in the same area. It was another summer night, and I'd taken to sleeping on the covered balcony of our house, where I could use the night breeze to stay cool. I'd gone to bed early that night, tired after a long day outside. But I woke up in the middle of the night, around 1 a.m. I felt very uneasy for some reason. That's when I heard the yipping again, that familiar yipping, and once again it had no responses and no other calls, just that solitary yipping of what should have been a single coyote. This time, however, I decided I wanted to see what was out there for myself before it had a chance to disappear. The balcony faced the front of the house, thankfully in the same direction as that yipping. I looked out of the wire screen that covered the balcony window in the direction of the sounds and where I assumed the entity would be. What I saw was anything but a coyote. It crouched on 2 legs, and from my vantage point, I could roughly guess it was about the size of a grown man, hunched over. In the darkness, I couldn't make out anything beyond the rough humanoid shape of the entity. It never looked up towards the balcony window, just shambled along before disappearing behind a row of houses, yipping every so often. That night, I wasn't able to go back to sleep. The following day was miserably wet and stormy. These weather conditions were nearly identical to that of the storm after the previous encounter. I didn't have another encounter for another 3 years after that. My final encounter with this entity happened when I was 15. I say final encounter, but for all I know, this creature is still out there, still following me. Anyway, by this time I was living in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. One day I'd gotten off the bus and I was walking back towards my house when I noticed movement at the edge of the road on the opposite side of where I stood. When I looked up, I locked eyes with a coyote. Normally, from my experience, wild animals avoid eye contact as much as possible, and making eye contact is typically a surefire way to agitate them. Quickly, I broke eye contact, still keeping an eye on the animal. But my gaze kept coming back to its eyes. They looked like a normal coyote's eyes, but there was something more than just the regular canine intelligence in them. The coyote stared at me, unmoving, for what seemed like hours, but was only a few minutes, before it turned around and loped off away from the road. I waited until I couldn't see it anymore, before I started walking again, heading home. That night, there was a thunderstorm that shook the house violently with every thunderclap, and the wind was strong enough to push the trees that sat behind our house to their breaking point. When I woke up the next morning, I found that a tree had fallen diagonally across our yard, missing the corner of the house where my bedroom was by only a few feet. To this day, I still don't know if the entity I encountered was anything strange, or if it was just a string of bizarre coincidences. Anyone who knows about coyotes knows they live pretty much everywhere in the United States, so they're not uncommon. But I know what I saw, and I don't think the storms after every encounter are just coincidences. Was this entity trying to warn me? Was it bringing the storms with it? Some part of me wants to meet this entity again, no matter what it might be, just so I can get some sort of closure, get closer to figuring out what it was. I don't think I'll ever know, but to this day, whenever I hear a coyote call, I immediately associate it with the sound and smell of rain. I stared death in the eyes. From Anonymous. This happened 13 years ago. I was 33, living alone in Montana. I am a hunter, like my father and his father, so I've had my experiences with animals. On the morning in question, I planned to go on a camping trip by myself. The spot I'd planned to go to was deep into the woods at a remote campsite. I drank a mug of coffee, packed my bags, and grabbed my belt, which had a .500 Magnum in its holster. I called my brother and asked him to come pick up my dog and take her back to his place. Then I was on my way. Nothing much happened on the drive there, although when I got to the trail, everything was silent. I assumed it was because I just pulled in, so I continued to the path. The entire hike, I never heard a bird, a bug, or even the rustling of branches. It was all just silence. After around 2 hours of this, I was officially on edge. I kept my hand on my gun because, honestly, I felt as if I was being stalked by some kind of predator. After 3 hours of my hike, I came to the campsite. As I was setting up my tent, the sounds of nature resumed, and I felt relieved. To say this campsite was beautiful would be an understatement. It was on a ridge overlooking the small town I lived in. I threw my bag in the tent, and I began to unpack. Suddenly, all at once, everything went silent again. It wasn't quiet for long. The silence was soon broken by the sounds of the trees knocking against each other in the wind. I set up my sleeping bag, and when I left the tent, I took a can of beans out of my food bag, then put the rest in a tree. That's when I heard a twig snap around 20 feet into the woods. I turned around, my hand on my gun, and watched the forest. Still and unmoving, I saw nothing. I sighed and shrugged my shoulders, trying to relieve some tension. As I tried to start a fire to cook my food, I heard rustling, followed by frantic but massive footsteps. I pulled out my gun, and once again, I turned around. The iron sights were aimed at the center mass of what I can only describe was a demon. What I was looking at had the legs and horns of a goat and stood on 2 feet. It had a brown, hairy body and human-looking arms. But I swear, its face was like that of a kangaroo, and its eyes emanated pure malice. It inched closer to me from the woods, and I fired a shot into the air, trying to scare it. In response to that, the creature screamed, sounding more like a fox, a deer's mating call, and the most painful, blood-curdling human scream I'd ever heard, all mixed into one. I blinked, and the thing was soon right in front of me. Its snout was nearly touching me. Those yellow, almost lizard-like eyes were stabbing right into my soul. I felt that if I moved, it would kill me. I don't know how. It was this feeling that dominated me. I slowed my breathing, and as I did, the creature pushed me to the ground. Without breaking eye contact, I jumped back up and stood there. It came up to me again and screamed. This scream seemed to shake the entire forest. In response, I threw my hands up and screamed back. It just kept staring at me, toying with me. I put my gun directly to its throat and screamed again, "Back off!" It still stood there, so I pulled the trigger. As my ears rang, I screamed again, and I watched the creature run back into the woods. I began to quickly pack up my things, and whenever I looked up, I saw it, staring at me, now from a distance. This terrifying thing followed me down the path all the way to my motorcycle. I sped out of there, at least going 30 miles per hour over the speed limit. I heard it scream one last time as I got onto the main road that leads to the town I live in. To be truthful with you, something in me wants me to go back. I want to see if I can kill that thing, hang its head on my mantle. But I do not think it would end well. Now I've got a wife and 2 kids, and I can't afford to just throw my life away hunting some forest demon. Something in the corn. From Anonymous. This story takes place in the summer of 2012. I was 13 years old at the time. I lived out in the country in a small farm town in central Illinois. Our home was surrounded by tall cornfields all summer long, until it was time for harvest. The corn never really bothered me, considering I'd grown up around it my whole life. But this summer was different. I was the only one of my friends who lived in the country, so naturally, they would always want to come to my house because there was more for us kids to do. I'd always been the outdoorsy type, and so was my best friend Max. During that particular summer, Max was over at my house a lot. We would do things like walk down to the creek and do some fishing, go swimming in our pool, have bonfires, build shelters out in the back, and usually, when it got dark, we'd go inside into my room and play video games. This particular time I'm talking about was different, though. We decided to do something we didn't normally do. That weekend, we would camp in the backyard with our little 2-person tent and a small fire pit. My parents' property was not huge, but it did have a decent-sized backyard and loads of trees. Since we were too young to do any real camping, this was our only option. This way, we could pretend the backyard was the forest, and if anything went wrong or we got scared, we could just walk up the property to the house and give up if we felt like it. Not that we planned on doing that, though. That evening, after setting up our little campsite and cooking some food over the fire, we eventually got tired and decided to go to bed early. Usually, I would be too creeped out to do this by myself. But my buddy Max was with me, and I also had my dog, who, funnily enough, was also named Max. Confusing, right? Anyway, we were in the backyard. Now, my parents' bedroom had a large sliding glass door and balcony that came off the back of the house, so I knew my parents would occasionally peer out to check on us throughout the night. This gave me a bit of comfort. Once in the tent, we lay down in our sleeping bags to get comfortable. My dog stayed outside the tent and roamed the yard as he normally did. He was an outside dog, after all. I don't remember much after that, not until the weirdness went down. Once we fell asleep, we must have stayed asleep for a good while. I don't remember really waking up much or tossing and turning. Then again, this was years ago, so small details like that are far from my mind. Now this is where the creepiness takes place. Randomly, I just woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dog barking hysterically. His barks sounded mean and vicious. He was not happy about whatever he saw, which wasn't like him at all. My dog was usually a gentle boy. He rarely barked at cars or strangers as it was, so this really caught me off guard. As I slowly woke up and rubbed my eyes, I noticed what my dog was barking at, even from the tent. Because I didn't see it, I heard it. Some strange erratic whistling seemed to be coming from no particular direction. It was so loud, too. It was definitely human whistling. No animal sounds like this, at least not to my knowledge. It was such a weird whistle, although human. It didn't have any specific rhythm or pattern to it. It was just so odd sounding. If I had to guess, this whistling sounded as if it was a beckoning call, most likely for my dog. Honestly, even though this could have been my dad pulling a prank, it freaked me out pretty bad in that moment. However, it only got much worse. I promptly woke up my buddy Max. It took many shakes and shouts to finally get him to wake up. But once he did, I didn't even have to say a word. He heard the whistling immediately, and we both looked at each other in silent terror. My second instinct after waking my buddy up was to check my phone. It was 3 a.m. That's the witching hour according to some. Me, being a believer in the supernatural, knew this, as did my buddy. I didn't even have to say anything. I just showed him the time, and he looked at me even more freaked out. "What is that?" Max asked. "I don't know, dude," I replied. Max suggested I call my dad to see if it was him doing all that whistling. So I did. The phone rang about 3 times, and finally my dad picked up the phone, sounding groggy. He asked, "What, son? I'm trying to sleep." To my horror, even as my dad spoke through the phone, the whistling never stopped, nor did the barking. I knew then it couldn't be my dad. I asked if my mom was in bed with him. To this, he replied, "Yes, why?" "Dad, there's somebody on our property whistling, and the dog's barking like crazy. We're really scared." All my dad said was, "It's probably a bird." I was angry that he was so quick to shut me down, not even trying to listen for himself. "Come back to the house then. What do you want me to do?" I hung up then. He wasn't going to help us. If we stayed out here, that meant possibly dealing with whatever that thing or person is. I told my buddy we had to book it back to the house, to which he replied, "Well, let's go then, hurry. I'm not staying out here." So I unzipped the tent as fast as I could, and we both went sprinting quickly back to the house. As we ran, I finally could tell what direction the whistling was coming from. It was coming from the west side of the property, from the cornfields. I didn't dare look in that direction. I just ran. As we got to the back door, I finally saw my dog. He was still barking in that general direction. He was close against the house, keeping his distance from that thing. I swung the door open, and we got inside as fast as we could. For a few seconds, I stood at the door, calling for my dog to come back in the house with us. He wouldn't listen though. He just kept barking. After getting frustrated and fearful for his life, I ran out to grab him by his collar so I could drag him inside myself. Just as I did this, the whistling seemed to get closer. This thing was coming in closer towards us. As I reached my dog, he suddenly decided to bolt past me and towards whatever that thing was in a violent manner. Whatever it was, my dog was now full sprint after this thing, chasing it. I yelled his name once more before slamming the back door and locking it. I was afraid my dog would be attacked or possibly killed, but we had to save ourselves. As we got into the safety of the house, we made sure all the doors were locked. My dad came down then to talk to us, and we explained to him what happened. For some reason, my dad seemed to think it was ridiculous and that we had imagined the whole thing. Of course, this made us furious. "Go listen then," we encouraged him. We watched as my dad went over to a window and opened it up to listen outside. Nothing. The noises had stopped. No whistling, no barking. My dad, thinking that he proved his point, went back to bed, suggesting that we do the same. But we couldn't. We were terrified. We were worried about my dog, too. We decided to go online, looking up noises that might match what we heard. But nothing at all sounded like it. At a certain point, we finally decided to rationalize for the sake of falling asleep that night. We just told ourselves it was some coyotes. But we knew it wasn't that, deep down. The following day, my parents went off to work. Max and I were there home alone, and we decided to go out looking for my dog. Almost immediately after going outside, we found him. He was running around, happy as ever, looking totally normal. No injuries whatsoever. We decided whatever it was, he must have chased it off. Being a lot less afraid now, and it being daytime, and that thing seeming to be gone, we pulled out the dirt bikes from the garage and went riding around the property. Everything was going great until I came around the corner on one of our usual routes. I saw my friend Max stopped in the middle of the track. He was still on his bike, but it was turned off now, and he signaled for me to do the same. I shut off my engine, and I asked him what was wrong. To this, he looked at me with big eyes. I heard it again, he said, and he pointed at the nearby cornfield. I thought he was messing with me, but I could tell after my second time asking him about this, he wasn't. He was truly terrified, and now so was I. Needless to say, we spent the rest of the day indoors. I never did see the thing, only heard it, but I think maybe that's for the best. I'm 23 now, I've got a wife and daughter, and I don't live there anymore. So I've never heard it again, not even the rest of the time I lived there before moving out. I hope I never do hear it again, to be honest. I thought it was a deer. From Anonymous. I've always been a lover of the paranormal and supernatural. It's been a special interest of mine. It's something I've poured my heart into, and I've spent hours researching to learn more about. Now, when I was in 6th grade, we had an essay to write. We could do anything we wanted, just so long as we did research, and told a lot on the topic. My classmates went with stories of fishing or making things. You know, normal 6th grade topics. I, of course, went the supernatural route. I chose to research skinwalkers. Ever since seeing an episode of a paranormal investigative show where they went to Skinwalker Canyon, I'd been amazed by the idea of these creatures. I spent hours looking into folklore, learning all I could. My final essay ended up being around 12 pages long, and I was incredibly proud. My classmates thought it was a little weird of me to do this, and some teachers were worried, but it never ended up causing me any trouble. It was rather ironic that I chose this for my essay, seeing as how the information I learned did nothing to help me realize what happened to me that July. The summer between 6th and 7th grade, we were moving houses. We weren't going very far, just about 15 minutes away, so we could be closer to my grandmother. The house we lived in at the time was surrounded by dense woods, which my younger brother and I had always spent much of our time in. We didn't have much property, but we did have a nice area of the forest to run around in and explore. We knew almost every square inch of the land. Back then, I loved the outdoors, and I would play out there for hours at a time. I felt comfortable out there, especially when I had my dogs with me. My house sat on a very small hill, and we had a small porch on the backside, looking out into the woods. It was just big enough to hold our grill, or maybe a few camping chairs, and I would often stand out there at dusk, listening to the sounds of the forest at night. The tree line was about 20 yards away from there, and the angle made it so whoever was on the porch would be a good 6 or 7 feet above the ground at the tree line. One night in July, I was standing out there as usual. I'd been sitting there reading one of my favorite books, and just relaxing. I was around 12 years old at the time, and I had a very short attention span. Once I was done reading, I got to my feet and leaned against the railing, looking out into the trees. After a few moments, I realized I could hear something walking around in the woods. Since we lived so close to the forest, we often got deer that walked through, sometimes coming right up to our house if we were silent enough. Naturally, I went quiet, waiting for a deer to come out of the bushes. Sure enough, after about 30 seconds, I saw a pale, slender shape stepping out from the brush. There was a brief moment of excitement to see such a pretty creature before my enthusiasm was replaced by confusion. This deer didn't look quite right. Its neck was just a little too long, and its limbs seemed thin and spindly. It shouldn't be able to stand on legs that thin. Surely it would have collapsed from the weight of its own body. But somehow, it was perfectly steady on its hooves as it walked towards me. I felt no fear yet, just confusion and fascination. As it got closer and closer, I realized that no deer should be this close to a human being. It looked directly at me, and I knew it was aware of my presence. With the thrill of terror, I realized maybe this deer had rabies or was sick. There was no way the deer could get on the porch with me, but I still slowly backed away from the railing, going inside and locking the door behind me. I thought about it for a moment, then shrugged it off, deciding this was just a sick deer. I told my mother about the deer, worried for our dogs or my brother. I didn't want them to get attacked by it or possibly get whatever made that deer sick. My mother immediately went on alert and kept my brother and the dogs inside for the next few days. We moved away that week, though it wasn't related to the sighting of the sickly animal. I never saw that deer again or another one like it. It's been several years since the encounter, and I'd forgotten about it until a few nights ago. My interest in the paranormal has remained with me, and I've continued to look into these creatures. I was searching through the cryptid tags on an app, and I found videos of creatures called not deer. Immediately interested, I searched up these beings, and after looking at the information for a few moments, the memories of that night in July came back to me. It was starting to make sense to me. The deer's appearance and behavior perfectly matched the stereotypical behavior of not deer. The story that I thought I made up with my 12-year-old imagination had actually been true. I was rather embarrassed for not realizing what this creature was until all these years later, considering how much I'd looked into these folklore beings. However, I decided to ignore the embarrassment and share my story instead. If I see another creature like this, I'll be sure to share more. In the days since realizing what my encounter was, I found myself looking into the woods more, wondering if I'll see a pair of big eyes staring back. Don't visit Pripyat. From Silver Bullet 54. In 2020, I went to Europe with 4 friends. We chose to visit the Ukrainian town of Pripyat. Before we went, we made sure to get clearance and also get Geiger counters to make sure we were in a safe zone. We figured one day in couldn't hurt as long as we stayed together. So we decided that we would explore, camp, pack up, and leave. Sadly, I wish it had been that easy. When we first arrived, my friend Kevin mentioned how silent and eerie it was. We saw the clocks at 11:55, then saw the abandoned amusement park. Mid-ride bumper cars, a creaking Ferris wheel, and an uncanny stillness was all that was left. It was like a giant void had opened up and sucked away all the people that once lived here. Our counters were showing very low levels of radiation, which was a good sign. But we knew if any of us began feeling strange, we were to book it out of there immediately. Now, a friend of mine, Brandon, had mentioned that the animals around here had been horribly affected. And believe it or not, we saw a wolf skulking around the area alone. We kept our distance and watched it, and when it turned towards us, we quickly averted our eyes to avoid challenging it. But when I happened to glance towards it for one moment, I saw just what was wrong with its eyes. Now, I'm no scientist or zoologist, so I don't know if the radiation caused it, but the wolf's eyes had gone completely white. I couldn't tell the cornea, iris, and pupil apart. Even though I figured it was blind, it was clearly sniffing around, so I'm sure it could have smelled us. Fortunately, he seemed to sense Five's scents and left without attacking. Brandon then said, "Let's go set up camp in one of those buildings. I'm not sure what it is, but I feel like something doesn't want us here." The other three were feeling uneasy as well, and I was still on edge after that wolf encounter. We all soon found an empty building with very little radiation and a roof to sleep under. I won't forget what happened next, though. Before I go on, I'll tell you now that I suffered no headaches, I did not feel lightheaded, and I had experienced no nausea, vomiting, or any other ill effects. So the radioactivity wasn't what caused this, it wasn't a hallucination. I woke up with a start when I heard a weird moaning sound. It was like a lawnmower that was about to die. I was about to ask anyone else in the group if they heard that, but all four were already sitting up and listening. "Okay," I said. "We can all confirm we just heard that." Brandon swallowed and replied, "I think I know what doesn't want us here." He then pointed behind my friend Grant. We all looked and screamed like we were trying to raise the dead. There stood a person. They were about 6.5 feet tall with beet red skin. They had 2 completely red eyes, and what appeared to be a new, vestigial, deformed limb protruding from their left arm. I then asked, "Does radiation even do that?" The other 4 just ran with their things, and I quickly followed. When I looked back, the man was just standing there, swaying and groaning as if he couldn't control his own movements and behavior. As soon as we got back home, Brandon left to see his parents, while Grant and I confirmed that what we saw was a possible victim of radiation. Kevin and Maria, the other 2, refused to talk about it, and I never brought this up again until now. So if you go to Pripyat, I suggest you keep your eyes and ears open. The radiation is still there, and some people either couldn't or wouldn't leave. You might run into an unfortunate radiation victim. So in all honesty, maybe it's not the best place to go. You can pay in the morning. From Mrs. Trash Panda. This is a story from my grandparents and my aunt. When my family goes camping, my grandpa can sleep anywhere, literally. But the second he tells you to pack it up and get out of there, you listen. You pack your things and you get back in the car. If I recall correctly, my grandparents and my aunt, who was around 7 or 8 at the time, were on their way down to Tennessee to pick up my mom and uncle, who had gone down there with friends for a vacation. While it was getting late into the afternoon, my grandparents pulled into a gas station up in the mountains of Tennessee. As a side note, I think it was somewhere near Gatlinburg. They like to sightsee a lot, so it wasn't unusual for them to go out of their way during a trip. They asked if there was a campground nearby, so they could sleep for the night. The lady at the counter of the gas station told them there was a gated campground about 5 miles down the road. Of course, my grandpa said okay, and drove down those 5 miles. At this point, my grandma was getting very uneasy. She asked my grandpa if he was sure this is where they wanted to stay. He said yes, I'd assume he was probably tired of driving at that point and didn't mind where they stayed. They pulled up to the gate and it was closed. There was a sign up that said, "Welcome, help yourself, and you can pay at the office in the morning." My grandpa had my grandma get out and open the gate. He pulled the camper through, and my grandma closed the gate back up. She got in the truck, and they drove down a huge hill. When they made it to the bottom, they found a campsite and parked the camper and started to get things ready for the evening. Now, this is the part that turned the whole trip for them into something ominous. As my grandma got everything set up and started cooking dinner, she looked up and she saw my aunt playing around outside while my grandpa was pacing up and down the length of the campsite. She said he just kept mumbling to himself. Finally, he grabbed my aunt, put her in the camper, and told my grandma in a panicked voice to stop and pack everything up. He said they needed to leave immediately. Of course, this confused my grandma, but she listened anyway and packed things up. She got my aunt and everything settled back in. My grandma asked my grandpa what was going on, and he replied, "We can't sleep here. We have to leave." So he started the truck up and basically floored it up the huge hill with the camper. They came up to the gate again, and my grandma had to once again get out to open and close it. After that, they drove for about an hour before finally stopping at a very well-lit truck stop. The next day, when they reached their destination, they told their friends that they had stopped at this campground that was gated. I guess this shook my grandpa because when one of their friends exclaimed that people had gone missing in that exact area, my grandpa began thanking God for having the instincts he had. When they got home to Michigan, they'd found out that over the past 2 weeks alone, 8 people had gone missing from that exact area, and they had nearly stayed the night there. Thank God my grandpa had a bad feeling and listened to it. My experience with the Wendigo, from Love Malfoy 5858. I live in New Jersey. This took place when I was around 10 or 12. Our school had organized a camping trip to the Bass River State Forest. Of course, being the adventurous kid I was, I instantly signed up. The day on which the trip was organized was in the winter, so we bundled up in cozy winter clothes before going on the 3-day camping trip. The trip started like any other. We got on the bus, teachers assigned us in groups, and all that stuff. We got off the bus with our camping gear and immediately sat to work. While we worked, however, I had this strange feeling that I was being watched. I brushed it off, thinking there's nothing wrong with that, there's lots of animals out here after all. As soon as I had this thought, a howl of some sort resounded from the woods all around me. Startled, I dropped the hammer I was holding to hammer pegs. The noise had startled me as even though my friend said it was nothing, it sounded more human than animal, but with still some traces of wolf in it. It's hard to explain, it was so bizarre. I pushed the occurrence to the back of my mind and I tried to enjoy the trip. Nothing besides that really happened on the first day. On the evening of the second day, we all lit a fire as it was cold. We were having a really good time, toasting marshmallows and singing songs. A few hours passed and the fire began to dwindle. We all went out in different directions in the woods to cover more ground, searching for more kindling. I had chosen to go through the most scary-looking part of the forest, as, like I said, I was adventurous. I had been picking up sticks for nearly 10 minutes before realizing the forest was quiet. Too quiet. This silence was deafening. I suddenly heard a twig snap near the tree line. I jumped in shock and looked around for the source of the noise. I called out to see if anyone was there, but then my voice seemed to echo. Seemed to.
Anybody there?
I say this because my echo sounded much more disturbing, much more inhuman. I got scared, dropping all the sticks I was carrying, and ran for my life. Behind me, I could hear twigs snapping. I never felt so terrified. I ran for a few minutes, and the twig snapping seemed to have stopped. I turned back to see. That was a big mistake. What I saw will be forever etched into my mind. A huge wolf, standing on 2 legs with what appeared to be antlers, was looking down at me, and I swear it looked as if it was smiling. I saw rows of razor-sharp teeth that could tear through bone like paper. I practically flew to the campsite and only stopped when I saw my best friend Allison. When I made it to her, I cried at her feet, breaking down. She asked what was wrong, pointing towards the woods from where I came from. Then I blacked out. When I woke up the next day in my tent, with worried faces all around me, I explained to everyone that I saw a wolf. That's all I could say. I knew no one would ever believe what I actually saw. The 3rd day, I stayed inside, terrified that I might see that awful creature again. Nowadays, I'm very wary of going into the woods, and I never stray too far anymore. If you ever encounter a creature like this, I advise you to run for your life as well. Abandoned racetrack. From Anonymous. I live in a semi-rural area in Vermont. It's quite peaceful, but the characters here can sometimes be unsettling. This story happened about 2 years ago, in 2020 as of writing this. It was June, and my friends and I were about to graduate high school. We were all set on going to graduation and hanging around after, but my buddy gave us all an idea. Let's go to the racetrack my cousin told me about. It looks cool. We can party there instead of going to graduation. We had all collectively decided that we were going to go. The day of the trip, we spent our time getting food, drinks, and whatever else we needed to have a good time. Around 2:30 p.m., we headed out to said racetrack. It was about an hour or so away from where we all lived, so we didn't mind the drive. On the way there, my friend drops the haul on us. Hey, this racetrack is abandoned. Not sure what's in it, but there's supposedly people in the basement. We all chuckled at this, brushing off the idea of people being held up in some abandoned racetrack. Upon our arrival, we noticed the place was massive. We parked around the basement entrance for easy escape if needed. We got unpacked and headed to the top floor. On our way in, we noticed a pillar with the words, "Welcome to Hell, Run," spray painted on it. We thought that was weird for sure, but we pushed forward. We soon made it to the 3rd floor, and we noticed we couldn't go up any further due to a collapse on the top floor. We all set up camp on the 3rd floor, and the partying began. After we all got a decent buzz going, we decided to explore the place by playing Manhunt. Mind you, this whole place was only lit by the moon, so it was pitch black in there. Me and a close friend of mine, named Susan, were finding the rest of my friends first. We started in the basement. When we entered the basement, the most foul stench hit me. It was like old books and decomposed dead things. We got farther into the basement when we began to hear feet shuffling. We thought this was one of our friends, so naturally, I made my way around the noise to surprise him and locate him. I was wrong. Fast forward a few minutes later, we noticed a mask sitting on a table. We looked at the mask and realized it was some sort of animal skin and staples made into a mask. We both thought this was disturbing and went to tell the others that we weren't alone. We got up to the 2nd floor stairs that led to the 3rd when a bottle smashed next to Susan's feet. Susan screamed. I consoled her and told her it was just our friends playing jokes on us. I looked up the stairs and, sure enough, my friend threw a bottle. He was laughing it off now. I turned in a different direction, and I nearly soiled myself. Standing at the end of the second floor were two cloaked and masked figures. I turned to Susan and immediately told her to run. "That's not funny. Stop," she yelled. So I picked her up and physically made her look at what I saw. Then she screamed again. The chase was on. The cloaked figures started walking towards us. I then screamed to the rest of my friends that we were not alone in here. As Susan and I ran away, my friends came running down from a separate stairway and met us at the front entrance. It took me a minute to catch my breath and explain what I saw. After I said this, my friend goes into his truck, pulling out a 12-gauge Winchester shotgun. "Even so," he says, "what are you talking about? There's no way that—" He was immediately interrupted by the sight of one of those figures. Holy crap! My other friend who was with us drew his pistol and handed it to me. "I'll sit with Susan. You guys go get our stuff," he said calmly. Two more of my friends and I went back into the racetrack. We took an alternate route to the second floor stairs. But on our way, we noticed a door was open. We all crept towards the door and noticed there was a light coming from inside. I kicked open that door. Inside, we found a pentagram with candles around it. Also around it was the mask I pointed out earlier. But what really messed with me was looking to my left, seeing the wall ripped apart. And as I took a closer look, above the huge hole in the wall were the words "Death Leap." I looked inside that wall, and to my surprise, there was a drop all the way to the basement. We quickly left that room and grabbed our things. We exited the building, but noticed 6 to 7 figures dispersing from the side of it. They were leaving too, but we didn't care. We packed and drove away. On our way out, those same figures stopped walking and began to stare us down. We've never gone back there. All of us decided to brush it off as satanic worshippers who decided to mess with me and my friends. And I hope that's all it was. Swedish Forest, from Nicholas L. I'm from Denmark. My friend and I had planned a fishing trip deep into the Swedish forest. This was back in 2007. My friend Matthias accompanied me. We went quite deep into those woods, and we were amazed by the beautiful nature out there, not really paying enough attention to where we were or how deep we'd gone. We soon found a really nice spot to start fishing. It was this little sandy beach. We started fishing, eventually losing track of time, when at one point we discovered some footprints in the sand. We studied them closer, and they looked like bear tracks. Now, everyone always says don't run from a predator, but do you know how hard it is not to run in that situation? Well, we began to hear rustling from the bushes a few feet away from us. Matthias and I stopped in our tracks and began to listen. It was like the entire forest went silent. There we were, still holding our fishing poles, just staring at these bushes, trying to see what was in there, when suddenly a snout pops out of them. We jumped back, and we were about to run, when a bear emerged from those bushes. Shocked by this huge animal, which we weren't used to seeing back in Denmark, we began to step back. I noticed the bear didn't seem too interested in us, so cautiously and slowly, we trekked back towards where we came from, but as I said before, we did not pay enough attention to where we were going. Basically, we were a bit lost. The panic began to set in before long. We went around and around in those woods for what seemed like hours. What we didn't know was that the bear we encountered had decided to follow us the entire time. As soon as we realized we were being tracked, we became extremely scared. It was at that point we looked at each other and nodded our heads and began to run, despite the warnings we've heard from people before. We only looked back on occasion to see if the bear was closing in. I couldn't stop thinking about how I was going to die in some godforsaken woods a long way from home. Then two extremely loud pops ring out through the air. It was a hunter sitting in a tree on his platform. We stopped then, catching our breaths. The hunter comes down, telling us how lucky we were that he saw us in the distance running from a bear who was right on our trail. To think we had been that close to being eaten. We explained the whole story on how we got lost. Then he led us back on the right path to our camp. I never got his name, but to dear Mr. Hunter, thank you for saving our lives. Thank you for listening to another unsettling episode of Unexplained Encounters. You can send us your story to have it narrated on the show at darkstories.org. Unexplained Encounters is an EerieCast original series. You can find other horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com, such as Redwood Bureau, a fictional anthology series, Freaky Folklore, a documentary-style series about myths and cryptids around the world, Destination Terror, a show about the most haunted places, and Tales from the Break Room, another show I host all about the scary things that happen to people at work. Again, that's EerieCast.com. By the way, if you want fewer annoying ads and you want to support what we do, consider going to EerieCast.com/plus to sign up for EerieCast Plus. That unlocks all our podcasts with all but host-read ads removed. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. I seem to get endless stories from Appalachia. Stories of the most insanely terrifying stuff you can imagine, or even fail to imagine. This story is yet another disturbing mark against that very haunted region of America. This story, titled "She Followed Us for Days" from an anonymous sender, tells of two men, two friends, enjoying one of many hikes they had done countless times before. But this hike turns into a nightmare when something uninvited begins to stalk them. A creature that looks human, but is clearly not. Before we begin, I have a quick announcement. From here on, to better adhere to YouTube's policies, I've decided to do gameplays for the visuals of my videos, featuring yours truly playing various scary games. The audio, however, will be completely the same as usual. In order, this video showcases the following games you can find on itch.io: Slide in the Woods, The Radio Tower, Hunting, Late Night Mop, and Easter Night. I might even be making a sort of appearance on my videos soon, too. Thank you for your understanding, and enjoy the story as usual. Briggs and I had been hiking together since we were 19, which means by the time I'm telling you about, we'd been doing it for 13 years. We met freshman year at Penn State in a campus outdoors club that neither of us took seriously. The club was run by a junior named Danielle, who wore chacos in November and talked about leave no trace principles like they were scripture. Briggs sat next to me at the first meeting, leaned over and whispered, "If she says mindful one more time, I'm going to eat my own hand." And that was it. That was the whole friendship, right there in the first 30 seconds. Some people you spend years getting to know, but Briggs, I understood him immediately, and he understood me. We never really had to work at it. We started with day hikes in Rothrock State Forest, moving on to overnighters in the Alleghenies, and by junior year we were planning week-long trips. After college, we scattered like everyone does. I went to Pittsburgh for a marketing job I hated. Briggs stayed in State College and got into carpentry, which suited him much better than office work ever could. But every October, no matter what, we met up for a section hike. We had done chunks of the Long Trail in Vermont, the Tuscarora Trail, parts of the AT in Virginia, and New Hampshire. 13 Octobers in a row. Briggs called it the only appointment he would never miss, and considering that Briggs had missed his own sister's wedding rehearsal dinner because he forgot what day it was, that meant something. The October I'm telling you about is 2019. We were both 32 years old. We picked a 5-day section of the Appalachian Trail through central Pennsylvania, starting near Swatara Gap and heading northeast through St. Anthony's Wilderness toward Clark Creek. If you've ever hiked the AT, you probably just winced, because the Pennsylvania section has a bit of a reputation. Thru hikers call it Rocksylvania. The trail is brutal on your ankles. Miles and miles of loose shale and jagged sandstone, where every step is a decision, and a wrong one means a sprain or worse. The forest is dense, mostly oak and hickory, and in late October the canopy is halfway to bare, which gives the woods a sparse gray look. The views are few, the terrain is relentless. Most thru hikers put their heads down and grind through Pennsylvania as fast as they can. We loved it though. Briggs and I had both grown up in central Pennsylvania, and there was something about the stingy difficulty of those trails that felt like home. The rocks didn't care about you. The forest did not perform for you with scenic overlooks and wildflower meadows. You hiked it because it was there, and it asked you to prove that you could. The ultimate challenge. So we started at Swatara Gap on a Tuesday morning in late October. The trailhead parking lot was empty except for a pickup truck with this faded NRA sticker and a Labrador asleep in the bed. October is off-season even by Pennsylvania standards, and the deeper you go into St. Anthony's Wilderness, the less likely you are to see another person. That was part of the appeal. The wilderness area is about 30,000 acres of unbroken forest, the largest roadless area in southeastern Pennsylvania, and the Appalachian Trail cuts through the heart of it. There's no cell service and no road crossings for long stretches, just rock and root and trees, and white blazes painted on trunks every couple hundred yards to tell you you're still on the right path. The first day was good, a perfect late October day in fact, cool and dry. The trail climbed out of Swatara Gap through a rocky corridor, then leveled out along a ridge, and Briggs and I fell into our usual rhythm, hiking side by side when the trail was wide enough, single file when it narrowed, talking when we felt like it, and quiet when we didn't. That comfort is the thing I value most about Briggs. I've hiked with other people before, people who think that silence is just too awkward and there has to be constant noise, but Briggs has never been afraid of a quiet mile. We talked about his daughter, Lily, who had just turned 4, and was, according to Briggs, already smarter than both of us combined. But in his own words as well, that's not saying much. We talked about my job, which I was thinking about leaving, and we discussed whether the Eagles had a real shot that year. A conversation that lasted about 45 seconds before we both agreed they didn't and moved on. We ate lunch on a rock outcrop overlooking a creek valley that was pretty in a modest Pennsylvania way. I mean, it wouldn't make a good postcard, but I was still glad to see it. It was around late afternoon, I think 4:30, when I saw something off the trail that I didn't think much about at the time. We were hiking through a dense section of oak forest where the undergrowth had died back for the season, leaving the ground covered in brown leaves and exposed rock. The visibility through the trees was decent, maybe 60 or 70 yards, before the trunks got thick enough to block the view. I was looking to my left for no particular reason, and I saw this shape on the ground, low and pale, about 50 yards into the woods. A dead deer, huh? Was my first thought. The color was wrong for the forest floor, too light against brown leaves, and it was roughly the right size. But I was moving and the trees kept interrupting my sightline, and by the time I stopped and looked back, I couldn't find it again. "Hey, did you see that?" I asked Briggs. He was behind me, watching his footing on the rocks. See what?" "Something off in the trees, light-colored. Maybe a dead deer?" Briggs glanced into the woods and shrugged. A lot of deer up here. He went back to watching his feet. I looked for another few seconds, scanning the leaf litter between the trunks, but there was nothing, except of course for the trees, the rocks, and the brown carpet of October. I let it go and kept hiking. We made camp at a flat spot near a seasonal creek around 5:30, right as the light was going amber and the temperature was starting to drop. The campsite was unofficial, nothing more than a patch of level ground that other hikers had clearly used before, with a fire ring made of stacked rocks and a couple of logs dragged into position as benches. We set up the tent, a two-person Big Agnes that we'd been sharing since 2014, and Briggs got a small fire going while I filtered water from the creek. We chowed down on some rehydrated chili, I love that stuff, and drank instant coffee that tasted like it had been made with pond water. Briggs told me this long story about a client who had hired him to build a deck, only to change the design 4 times in 2 weeks. He told it well. Briggs had always been a better storyteller than me. He does voices and gestures and builds up to a punchline like he's constructing it. Which, I guess he was. The evening was cold and clear with stars everywhere. You don't get that kind of sky anywhere near the city. We sat by the fire until about 9 p.m. Then we crawled into the tent. Briggs fell asleep fast. Dude could just flip a switch in his head and be out like that. Wish I was like that. It always took me half an hour, maybe more, to get to sleep every night. So I lay awake for a while, listening to the woods. Night sounds in the Pennsylvania forest in October are mostly wind and settling branches. The oak trees creak. Small animals move through the leaves. There's a baseline rustle that you get used to after a few minutes, and then eventually you just stop hearing it. It becomes background static. I was lying on my back in my sleeping bag, nearly asleep at long last, when I heard something that cut through that baseline. A branch creaking, a real one, not the light snap of a twig under a squirrel, but the creak of something heavy enough to stress a limb. It came from the south, uphill from our camp, maybe 30 or 40 yards out. I opened my eyes and listened. Another crack from the same direction, the same distance too, followed by nothing. I waited another 5 minutes, hearing only the usual sounds like wind and creaking and the faint trickle of the creek. Gotta be a deer, I told myself. Just a doe moving through the undergrowth. A big doe, or maybe a small buck. Sounded normal to me, so I rolled over and went to sleep. In the morning, I found something at the edge of our campsite that I couldn't make sense of. There was a long mark in the soft mud near the creek, about 3 feet from where I'd been filtering water the night before. Looked like a drag mark, narrow and shallow, but at one end of the drag, there were 4 thin impressions in a row, close together, pressed deep into the mud. They looked like finger marks, definitely not some animal's toes. These were 4 slim impressions in a row, slightly curved, spaced like the fingers of a hand that was missing its thumb, or like a hand where the thumb had been held tight against the palm. I squatted next to the marks and looked at them for a while. That's when Briggs came over, toothbrush in mouth, leaning over my shoulder. He looked at them. "Oh," he said around the toothbrush. "What do you think of that?" I asked. He spat, wiped his mouth. "Raccoon, I think. You know, they got those little weird hands." "Since when do raccoons drag their fingers through the mud in a straight line?" "Since always, man. They're basically tiny drunk dudes. They do all kinds of weird crap." He walked back to the tent then and began to pack his sleeping bag. Conversation over. I looked at the marks for another minute. The line in the mud was about 14 inches long, perfectly straight, and it ended at the finger impressions. I chalked it up to raccoon, admitting Briggs was likely right, then put it out of my mind. After one more thought. That being that raccoons have 5 toes, not 4. We broke camp and got moving by 8. The second day started well. The trail wound through more rocky forest, climbing and dropping along the ridge. The hiking was hard enough to keep my mind occupied. It was an overcast day, cooler than the day before, with a flat gray sky that made the bare trees look like pencil drawings. We talked less than usual. Briggs seemed quiet, and I figured he was just working through the rocks, thinking about whatever Briggs thinks about when he goes quiet, which I've never actually asked him. Around midday, we stopped for lunch on a section of trail that ran along the top of a narrow ridge. The ground dropped away steeply on both sides, maybe 40 feet down to the left, into a rocky hollow, and a gentler slope to the right, toward a creek. We sat on our packs and ate peanut butter on tortillas. I was looking out over the hollow when I saw something move down in the rocks below us. It was pale, so obviously pale, because it was in front of some gray-brown rocks, and that kind of paleness did not belong to any animal that I could name in those woods. It was moving along the bottom of the hollow, roughly parallel to the ridge we were sitting on, and it was quite low to the ground. I couldn't see it clearly because of the angle and distance, and because it kept passing behind rocks and dead brush. But what I could see was enough to make me put my tortilla down. It was moving on all fours, but not like a bear. A bear walks in a rolling sort of way, its weight shifting side to side, and you can always tell what a bear is even at a distance. This moved differently. The limbs were too long relative to the body, and the motion was quick, reminding me more of a spider covering ground across someone's kitchen floor. I watched it for about 10 seconds as it moved through the hollow below us, in and out of cover, heading in the same direction we'd been hiking. "Hey, Briggs, look down there." He looked. The thing was behind a rock outcrop when he turned his head, and by the time it emerged on the other side, it had moved further away and the brush was thicker. "Where? I don't see anything." "Down in the hollow. Something pale and moving real quick, on all fours." Briggs scanned the hollow for a few seconds. "Man, I just don't see it." He took another bite of his tortilla. "Could just be a stray dog, or someone's dog they let run loose. You know how some campers are." "Yeah, but we haven't seen another person in 2 days." "So it's a stray for sure then, or just a coyote. Coyotes can look light-colored from a distance." He chewed and shrugged. "Are you going to eat your lunch, or are you going to keep staring into the woods like a golden retriever?" I looked back into the hollow. Whatever I'd seen was gone now. The rocks and dead brush sat there now, looking very ordinary. And after a minute, I picked my tortilla back up and ate it. But still, I kept glancing down into the hollow while we finished our lunch. When we packed up and started to hike again, I found myself listening to the woods on both sides of the trail. I hadn't been doing that before. The afternoon passed slowly. The sky stayed overcast, and the temperature kept dropping. By 3, it felt like an early evening. We were deep into St. Anthony's wilderness now, hours from the nearest road in either direction, and the forest felt very closed in now. The trail was certainly narrower here, hemmed in by mountain laurel thickets on both sides, that dense evergreen growth that stays green year-round and blocks your vision at about 10 feet. You could hear things moving in the laurel. Small things, probably, the rustling of chipmunks and ground birds. But there was something to it, or maybe that was in my head, something about it that made me look left and right as we walked. At about 3:30, Briggs stopped. I almost walked right into his pack. "Okay," he said. "I just want to say, for the record, that I see it too." "See what?" He pointed behind us, back down the trail. The path curved about 50 yards back, disappearing around a bend in the laurel. "I've been checking behind us for the last 20 minutes. I kid you not, every time I look, there's something back there, just at the curve." My throat felt tight. What does it look like?" "I can't tell. It's there and then it's not. Might be an animal following our scent, which is normal, I guess. Coyotes follow hikers sometimes." He paused. "But I just don't think it's a coyote." I turned and looked at the curve in the trail. The trail between the bushes was a corridor of packed dirt and flat rock. I didn't see anything. "I believe you, man," I said. "I saw something in the hollow earlier that didn't look right. I wonder if it's the same thing." We stood there on the trail for a minute, two grown men staring back the way we'd come. But nothing showed itself, and the forest made its normal sounds. After a while, that fear started to feel silly. "Could be a bobcat," Briggs said. "They follow people sometimes too. Curious critters." "Yeah, could be." We turned and kept hiking. We made camp early that evening, a little before 5 o'clock, at a spot near a stream that the trail crossed on a series of flat rocks. We set up the tent close to the water, and I gathered firewood while Briggs filtered water and started heating dinner. The campsite here was more exposed than the previous nights, a wider clearing in the forest with better sightlines. I noticed both of us positioning things so we could see the tree line from where we sat, though neither of us mentioned it out loud. Over dinner, Briggs brought up the thing on the trail. "So, I've been thinking about what we saw back there." He poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks up. "You know there's a story about that section of the AT, right?" "I swear, there's a story about every section of the AT. Half of them involve the same ghost hitchhiker," I replied. No. This one's different. I read it on a forum a couple years back, a thread about Pennsylvania trail legends. Most of it was garbage, but there was a guy who posted something long about St. Anthony's Wilderness specifically, and it stuck with me." He poked the fire again, this time setting the stick down afterward, and he looked at me. I could tell he'd been holding this in since the afternoon. Briggs is not the kind of guy to just throw things out casually. When he tells you something, it's because he decided he has to. "So the story goes back to the 1860s, he explained. "There were coal towns all through this area back then, little company towns in the hollows. Most of them are gone now. But you can actually still find the foundations and old mine shafts in the woods, if you know where to look. One of the towns was called Roush Gap. It's on the AT, actually. We'll be passing through it tomorrow or the day after. There's nothing left of it but some stone foundations and the old railroad grade." I knew about Roush Gap. It's one of those ghost towns that the AT passes through. You can read about it in trail guides. But Briggs wasn't talking about the town itself. Let me see. There was a woman in Roush Gap. I think her name was Mary Coyle? Her husband worked the mines. They had 3 kids. In 1868, there was a mine collapse, a bad one, and her husband was one of the men killed. Standard tragedy for the era. But Mary didn't leave town like most widows did. She stayed. The neighbors said she stopped talking, stopped eating, and she stopped coming to church. And then, one day in the winter of 1869, she walked into the woods and didn't come back. The fire cracked and settled. Briggs kept going. "They searched for her. The whole town went out, which wasn't many people, maybe 40 or 50, but they combed the woods for 3 days. They found her dress hanging from a tree branch about a mile east of town, folded over the branch like she had placed it there carefully. Her shoes were underneath it, but they never found Mary." "A ghost story," I said. "Sad woman dies in the woods, haunts the trail." "Hold on, man," he said. "That's the historical part. Here's the trail part." Briggs picked his stick back up and drew a line in the dirt between his feet. Starting in the 1970s, after the AT was rerouted through St. Anthony's Wilderness, hikers started to report something. Always in this specific location between Swatara Gap and Clark Creek, and always in the fall. They'd see a figure in the woods, usually at dusk or at night. A pale woman on all fours, crawling, naked and incredibly thin, like you could see her bones moving under the skin. And she smiles. Every account mentions the smile. I didn't say anything. The guy in the forum had collected maybe a dozen of these reports going back to 1974. Some of them were from thru-hikers, some from section hikers, a couple from hunters. The details were creepily consistent. A pale, crawling woman, emaciated and fast. She follows people. She watches them from the tree line. She comes into their camps at night and circles them, and she smiles, always smiling. What does she do? I asked, trying not to sound too scared. That's the thing, he said. In most of the reports, she doesn't do anything. She follows and watches, and she shows up and she smiles at you. Then she leaves. A couple of the older reports mention her getting closer, touching tents, making sounds. One thru-hiker in 2004 said she followed him for 2 full days, and he could not get her to go away. He tried yelling at her, tried throwing rocks. Nothing worked. She just kept crawling along behind him, always about 30 yards back, and every time he turned around, she'd freeze and just smile at him. He said the smile was disturbing. Said it looked like a real smile, as if she were genuinely happy, like she was having the time of her life. Briggs stopped drawing in the dirt and looked at me. The fire was between us, and it put shadows on his face that made him look older. The forum guy called her the Rausch Gap Crawler. A dumb name if you ask me. But I read that thread at 2 a.m. on my phone in bed. Read it a few times over, too. And I didn't sleep too good after. Ever since, I've thought about it more than I'd like to admit. I looked at the dark trees at the edge of the firelight. Nothing but sheer blackness between the trunks. That kind of abyssal darkness that could be 10 feet deep, or 1,000. Something in me wanted to laugh at the story. It was just a campfire legend, after all. But I kept thinking about that pale shape I'd seen in the hollow that afternoon, the quick spider-like movement of it, and how Briggs watched something follow us on the trail for 20 minutes. There was also those finger marks in the mud. Be real with me. Do you think that's what we're seeing out here? I asked. He shrugged. I think we're seeing something. And I think if I'd never read that thread, I'd be telling myself it was a coyote, a bobcat, or a sick deer, and I'd believe it. But I read that thread, and that thing in the hollow was pale and crawling. The thing on the trail behind us was very low to the ground, too. And I've been sitting here trying to talk myself out of the obvious conclusion, and I'm not doing a good job. The obvious conclusion being that a dead coal miner's wife from 1869 is crawling around the woods and following us, I smirked. I said it was obvious. I didn't say it was rational. Eventually, the fire burned down to coals, and Briggs built it back up, and we sat with it some more. I wanted to say he was being ridiculous, that at the very worst it was a stray dog following us around. But I kept seeing that quick pale movement along the bottom of the hollow earlier. How quick it was and how wrongfully proportioned it was. I couldn't make any non-horrifying explanation stick. So what do we do? I asked. Well, we gotta keep hiking. Not really much else we can do. We are 2 days from a road in either direction. We can't call anyone. We just keep going and we stay alert. Careful not to do anything stupid, of course. That's your plan, I said. Don't do anything stupid. He looked at me and smiled. Dude, I've been not doing anything stupid for 32 years. I'm good at that. I grinned back, and for a second it was just Briggs being Briggs and the woods were just woods and everything was fine. We turned in around 9:30. I zipped the tent up tight, every zipper, vestibule, and inner door, and I checked them twice. I could hear Briggs doing the same thing on his side without saying anything about it. I lay in my sleeping bag then and listened. The wind had picked up and the trees were moving, creaking and rustling, and I couldn't sort the sounds into categories like normal. Every noise was potentially something. I stared at the tent ceiling, which was a gray color in the darkness, and I reminded myself that the forest was full of animals. Animals make sound. This was a normal night. Nothing from the underworld is going to come out here and drag us away. Eventually, I comforted myself enough to close my eyes. I have no idea what time it was when Briggs grabbed my arm. His hand closed on my forearm and squeezed hard. I woke up fast, my heart really going at it. Briggs was lying stiff as a board in his sleeping bag next to me, his head turned toward the foot of the tent, and his fingers digging into my arm hard enough to leave marks. I followed his eyes. The vestibule, the entrance to the tent, was unzipped. As I said before, I had zipped it, and I had checked it twice. But there it was, open, folded back, and the inner tent door, which was mesh, was still closed, but through the mesh I could see her. She was right there. Her face was 6 inches from the mesh, maybe less. Close enough that I could see the texture of her skin in the faint light. She was on her hands and knees, her head pushed forward into the vestibule space between the rainfly and the inner tent, and she was looking at us. Her skin was horribly pale, like some creature uncovered by a rock. Her hair was dark and long and matted, hanging on either side of her face in clumps. She was thin enough that I could see the knobs of her collarbones standing out above her chest as if they were handles. And she was smiling, a wide, closed-mouth smile that pushed her cheeks up and narrowed her eyes. A smile like someone who had just been told wonderful news that had absolutely nothing behind it that I'd recognize as human emotion. She was looking at Briggs. Then she shifted, and she was looking at me. And the smile didn't change. The eyes moved then, tracking from Briggs to me like someone watching a tennis match. But the smile stayed exactly the same, fixed in place. I have no idea how long we stayed like that. All the while, something from the woods that looked like a woman but was not a woman smiled at us from only 18 inches away through a layer of mesh that suddenly felt like it was made of nothing. Briggs moved first. He lunged forward in his sleeping bag and punched her right in the face through the mesh. It was a clumsy punch, awkward because he was lying down and couldn't get his weight behind it, but he caught her somewhere around the mouth and her head snapped back. She made a sound. I will try to describe the sound as best I can. It was like a laugh, a high, breathy giggle, like tickling a little kid, like someone who was very delighted. She made this sound as her head rocked back from the punch, and she pulled away from the vestibule. I heard her move across the ground outside, fast, a scrabbling sound of hands and knees on dirt and rock. And like that, she was gone. Briggs sat up. I sat up. We sat there in the tent in the dark with our hearts going and the vestibule hanging open. The sound of that giggle still in the tent like it had been absorbed by the fabric. I punched it, Briggs said. I punched it in the face. Yeah? And it laughed. Yeah, it did. Briggs was breathing hard. I could see his hand shaking as he reached for the vestibule zipper, pulling it closed. He zipped it up, unzipped it, then zipped it up again, running the pull back and forth like he was testing it, making sure it would hold, knowing it wouldn't matter if she wanted to open it again. We did not sleep that night. We sat in the tent with our headlamps on and our backs against our packs, listening, and we stayed like that for the remainder of the night. We heard the usual forest sounds and nothing else. She didn't come back, but the quality of the silence had changed. Every pause of sounds outside felt like it could be occupied, like something out there was waiting for us. Dawn came slow and gray. We packed in silence and got on the trail before full light, headlamps on, moving fast over the rocks. Neither of us said a word about what happened. There was a mutual understanding that both of us knew what we saw was real, and that there was no need to discuss it. Not yet, not until we were out. We needed to make use of all the daylight time we had. We concentrated on leaving for about 2 hours. At 9:15 on a rocky section of trail, which climbed through a gap in the ridge, Briggs stopped ahead of me, and he said, "She's back." I turned around. She was on the trail behind us about 30 yards back, right at the edge of where the trail curved out of sight between two boulders. She was on all fours. In the daylight, I could see her more clearly than I wanted to. She was definitely naked, as thin as she'd looked through the tint mesh, ribs and spine showing up through the skin, and her body was the color of candle wax. Her hair hung around her face and touched the ground. Her hands were flat on the trail surface, and her fingers were long. I could see dirt under the nails from where I stood. And she was smiling still, that same wide and fixed smile, like she was in the middle of the best day of her life. I stared at her, and she stared at me. She didn't move. She was perfectly still on the trail in the gray morning light, crouched on all fours, like a sprinter waiting for the gun to go off. And the smile never wavered. The eyes never blinked. I realized after about 5 seconds, I was holding my breath. Some part of me had decided that if I made a sound right then, she would come towards me. "Let's go," Briggs said. "Don't look at it. Just walk." I turned around and walked like he said. I could hear Briggs behind me, his boots on the rock, and behind him, I could hear nothing. That was so disturbing. Why couldn't I hear her? We hiked for 10 minutes without stopping. Then Briggs looked back and said, "Oh God, she's still there. Further back, but still there." We kept going. Every 15 or 20 minutes, one of us would check behind us, and she would be there, always at around the same distance, crawling along the trail in our wake. She never closed the gap. She never fell too far behind either. She matched our pace pretty well, like a shadow. And every time we looked, there she would be, smiling. "She's playing with us," Briggs said around noon. We were sitting on a rock eating trail mix, which neither of us wanted, but we had to do it. We'd been hiking hard for 5 hours straight, and our bodies were running out of fuel. She was crouched on the trail behind us, 40 yards back, still and smiling. The world's most sickly dog waiting for its owner to finish a conversation, so they could keep going on their walk. "What do you mean playing, Briggs?" "I mean to her, this is a game. She comes to the tent, she watches us, she follows us. She's not trying to hurt us yet, but she's entertaining herself. You know how a cat will play with a mouse for an hour before killing it? It bats it around and lets it run, catches it again. Man, this is what that feels like." "Dude, that analogy does not end great for the mouse, Briggs." "I know." He chewed his trail mix and looked over his shoulder at her. "I'm trying to figure out the rules. If it is a game, there are rules to it. There's a thing she wants and a thing she doesn't want. Maybe if we can figure it out, we can make it out of here. The thing she wants is to follow us and smile at us." "Yeah, and the thing she doesn't want is to be hit in the face, apparently, because she left when I punched her. I don't think she liked that. But she laughed when you punched her, Briggs." He went quiet, before eventually saying, "She did laugh, but she still left, right?" He stood up and shouldered his pack. "We need to keep moving. We're about a day and a half from Clark Creek if we push it. If we hike until dark and start again at dawn, we can be at the road by tomorrow afternoon." So we hiked. She followed. The afternoon was cold, and the trail wound through dense forest with rocky gaps and long stretches of mountain laurel, where the bushes became too close on either side, forming a sort of green tunnel. In the laurel, we could not see her behind us. I kept hearing sounds in the brush on both sides, quick rustling movements. I kept expecting her to jump out of nowhere and do something horrible to us. Around 3 in the afternoon, Briggs said something I didn't expect. "I need to tell you something." He was ahead of me on the trail, walking fast, not looking back. "Can it wait? I'm kind of focused on not being eaten by a wild female boogeyman." "It can't wait. That's the point. If something happens to us out here, I need you to know this." His voice didn't sound so Briggsley anymore. He'd always been the steady one in our friendship. The planner, the knows-what-to-do guy. The voice I was hearing now was desperate. "All right," I said. "Tell me." He kept walking, boots crunching on rocks and his pack swaying. He talked to the trail ahead of him, like it was easier than talking to my face. "You remember when your dad was in the hospital in 2012? I felt something cold move through me, separate from that fear in the woods and the thing following us. My father had died of cancer in November of 2012. He'd been in the hospital in Altoona for the last 3 weeks of his life. I had driven down from Pittsburgh every weekend, but during the week I was at work, and the hospital was 2 hours away. I kept telling myself there would be more time. "Yeah, I remember," I said. "The night he died," Briggs went on. "Thursday night. You were in Pittsburgh. You told me afterward that the hospital called your mom and your sister, but nobody called you, and you didn't find out until Friday morning, and you didn't get to say goodbye." I had told Briggs this. In fact, I told him this once at a bar in State College, about 6 months after my father died. That was the drunkest I'd ever got, and I told him that the thing I couldn't forgive was that no one had thought to call me. My mother called my sister called my aunt, and somehow in the chain of phone calls that happens when someone dies, my number got skipped. I woke up on Friday morning to a voicemail from my mother that started with, "I'm so sorry, honey," and my father was already 12 hours gone. Briggs was still talking. His voice was steady and careful. "Your dad's nurse called me Thursday night, around 10 p.m. Your dad had given her a list of numbers to call. You were on it. I was on it. She called me first because my number was at the top of the list. She said your dad was asking to see you and that the doctors thought it would be tonight or maybe tomorrow, and I could get in touch with you and let you know." He stopped walking. He turned around and looked at me. He looked so sad. I was at Kevin Dougherty's house at the time. We were watching the Steelers game and I was drunk. Really drunk, man. I picked up the phone and I heard what the nurse said, and I told her I'd call you. Then I hung up. I put the phone down, and I forgot. I forgot to call you. I passed out on Kevin's couch at halftime, and I didn't remember the call until the next morning. And by then your mom had already left you a voicemail that your dad was dead. And there I was, the person who was supposed to tell you to get in the car and drive to Altoona to spend a few moments with your dad before he died. And I'd forgotten to do it. My head spun, and I felt really hot under my skin. It felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. "You told me no one called you," I said. "I know. I sat in a bar with you and I told you that the worst part was that no one called me. And you knew. You knew the whole time." Yeah, I knew the whole time." He wasn't looking away from me. It looked like he was forcing himself to hold eye contact, and he looked like he was in pain. "I've wanted to tell you every single day for the last 7 years, every hike and every phone call we've had. I had to sit there knowing that you spent the last night of his life asleep in your apartment because I was too drunk to call you. I'm telling you this now because we're in these woods with that thing behind us. I don't know if we're gonna get out of this, but I can't die with you not knowing." I looked at my best friend of 13 years. 2 things were happening inside me at the same time. Rage. Pure rage. filling my chest and working its way throughout my whole body. The other was something I didn't expect. The understanding that Briggs had been carrying this for so long. It had clearly been eating him alive. I don't know what to do with that, I said. And truthfully, I didn't. You don't have to do anything with it right now, man. You can hate me later. I just needed you to know. I opened my mouth to say something else, not sure what it was, but Briggs looked past me, and his expression changed. She's closer, he said. I turned. She was 20 yards behind us on the trail. She had cut the distance in half while we'd been standing there. She was smiling, always smiling. We gotta move, Briggs said, and we went. The next 2 hours were the hardest hiking I've ever done. We pushed northeast on the trail, as fast as the rocks would allow, which was not as fast as either of us wanted. The Pennsylvania AT punishes you for rushing. The footing is loose shale and angled sandstone. If you move too quick, you're gonna roll an ankle or worse. We pushed anyway, and behind us, she kept pace. She was closer than before, maybe 20 or 15 yards at most. I checked behind us every few minutes, and she was always there, crawling fast over those rocks on hands and knees with terrible grace, covering ground that should have been difficult, like the rocks didn't apply to her. Her smile never changed. Her eyes never left us. She moved over the jagged shale without slowing, and I never once saw her flinch or adjust for the terrain, as if her hands and knees were made of something harder than skin. The trail came to a section I recognized from the map, a place where the ridgeline narrowed and the path ran along the top of a rocky spine with steep drops on both sides. The left side fell away sharply, about 60 feet down into a boulder field. The right side was a more gradual slope, but still dangerous, loose rock and dead timber at a 45-degree angle. The trail itself was maybe 4 feet wide, a narrow strip of flat rock on top of the ridge, and it ran like this for about a quarter mile before widening out again where the ridge broadened. Briggs was ahead of me. He moved out onto the narrow section without hesitation, and I followed. For a few minutes, the focus required to keep my boots on the flat rock and away from the edges pushed everything else out of my head. The drops on either side were real. A fall to the left would kill you. A fall to the right would break bones. I was about halfway along the narrow section, Briggs 20 feet ahead, when I looked up from the trail, and I saw her. She was on the ridge ahead of us. Ahead. She was crouched on the narrow trail about 30 yards in front of Briggs on all fours, facing us, blocking the path. I don't know how she managed to get there. She had been behind us only 5 minutes before. She had been behind us every minute of every hour since this morning. And now she was in front of us, on a narrow ridge with 60-foot drops on both sides. And she was between us and the wider trail beyond, still smiling. Briggs saw her and stopped. "Dude," he said. His voice was very calm. "I see her," I replied. "I can't go forward." "I know. Can we go back?" I looked behind me. The narrow trail stretched back the way we'd come, empty. She was only ahead of us. I turned back to face forward, and Briggs was standing still on the narrow ridge, his pack silhouetted against the gray sky, and beyond him she was crouched on the trail motionless, smiling at us. But then she started moving. She came towards Briggs on her hands and knees, crawling along the narrow ridge with that quick and fluid motion, covering the distance between them faster than I could even process. Briggs took a scared step back, more steps before he finally bumped into me. We had nowhere to go. The trail behind us was clear, but backing up on a 4-foot-wide ridge of loose rock while facing forward. That's how you fall off a mountain. We couldn't turn around. We had no room. She closed to 20 yards, 15, I could see her face clearly now. The smile was too huge, the muscles of her cheeks pulled up so far that her eyes were nearly shut, and behind the slits of her eyelids, I could see her pupils tracking us. Her fingers gripped the rock as she crawled, and I could hear her nails clicking on the stone, a rapid ticking sound. She was making a sound in her throat. That giggle, that breathy, delighted giggle she'd made when Briggs had socked her in the face. But it was sustained, continuous. 10 yards. I could smell her, and she smelled of rotten milk. Her skin was so pale and so thin that I could see the veins in her hands and bones. It was so horrible that the elbows looked like knots tied in rope. Briggs did something brave and possibly stupid then. He crouched down on the trail, making himself low, making himself solid, and he planted his boots and he said, loud and firm, like he was trying to teach an aggressive dog a lesson, "Stop!" And she stopped. Only 8 yards away. She crouched on the narrow ridge, and the giggling trailed off. She looked at Briggs with her head tilted slightly to the side. "Turn around," Briggs said. "Go back." She didn't move. She watched him. Wind blew across the ridge, moving her hair. She did not blink, and that smile did not change. She stayed exactly where she was, crouched on all fours on that narrow path, with a 60-foot drop waiting for one of us. She seemed perfectly at home, as if she could stay there for hours. We stood there for too long. My legs were shaking, and I could feel Briggs shaking too. His pack was touching my chest, and I could feel the tremor coming through the frame. Briggs then picked up a rock, a flat piece of shale about the size of his palm. He wound up and threw it at her as hard as he could. It hit her in the shoulder with a sound like a hand slapping a wall. Her body rocked with the impact. She made a giggle again, loud, almost a shriek this time, but it still sounded like pure glee. She rocked back on her heels. Then she did something that I've played in my head more times than I can count. She reached out with one hand and placed it on the rock at the edge of the trail, right at the lip where the ridge dropped away 60 feet into the boulder field. She kept her eyes on us, kept a smile on us. She shifted her weight onto that hand, leaning out over the drop, body angling sideways off the trail, and she began to move. She crawled off the trail and onto the near vertical rock face of the ridge's left side, moving sideways and down, her hands and feet gripping the stone at an angle that is impossible for any human, like some sort of evil gecko on a wall. She moved about 10 feet down the rock face, then stopped and hung there, clinging to the side of the ridge below the trail. Her face turned up towards us, smiling, watching, waiting. She had cleared the path. She had moved off the trail and onto the cliff face as if it were a sidewalk, and she was hanging there below us in a position that would have killed a human climber without ropes. "Go," Briggs said. "Go now." We went. We walked past the spot where she'd been, fast but careful, placing our boots on the flat rock with everything we had. I looked down as I passed her position. She was there on the rock face below me, clinging to the stone with fingers and toes. Her face tilted up toward me as I walked by. Her smile looked more enormous than ever. If she was going to be that happy for me, then I guess I was happy for her too. We made it to the wide section of the trail and ran. A bad idea to do on the rocks in the Pennsylvania AT, but we ran anyway, stumbling and catching ourselves and running again. And we did that until neither of us could run anymore. After that, we walked fast, and we didn't stop until the light was almost gone. We did not make camp that night. We hiked through the dark with headlamps on, following the white blazes from tree to tree, and for that time, we did not see or hear her. The forest was quiet, and it finally felt normal again, but even that didn't mean anything to either of us. We made it to the road at Clark Creek at 11:40 the next morning. We walked out of the trees and the gravel road was right there, So beautiful, with a metal gate and a trail register, and a brown National Forest sign. I could have kissed that pavement. Briggs sat down on the gravel next to the sign and put his hands in his hands. I called his wife, Jenna, from the first spot where I could get signal. I let her know we were okay, but we'd had a rough trip, and I asked if she could come pick us up. She said she would be there in 2 hours. We sat on the guardrail and waited. We were incredibly jumpy. The road was empty and the sky was still gray, the trees still bare. But now we were on the other side of the guardrail, not on the side of those woods. Briggs finally spoke. Is she still back there? I looked at the tree line where the trail emerged from the forest. The white blaze on the last tree was visible, a rectangle of white paint on dark bark. Beyond it, the trail curved into the trees and disappeared. I couldn't see anything on it. I don't know, I said. Me neither. He looked at his hands. His right knuckles were scraped from where he'd punched her through the tent mesh. Do you think she just stays in that section, between Swatara and Clark Creek? Or do you think she goes wherever she wants? I didn't have an answer. I kept staring into the woods, hoping that she was contained to that place. Jenna picked us up at 2:15 p.m. We put our packs in the back of her SUV. Briggs hugged his wife, and she looked at me over his shoulder with a question on her face. We drove back to State College. The car was so warm and nice. Lily was in her car seat asleep, and Briggs reached back, holding her hand without waking her up. And he didn't let go the entire drive. This story is proof to me that what they say about the dating world these days is completely and sadly true. That poor woman, she displayed all the signals, and yet she remains out there on the Appalachian Trail alone to this very day, waiting for her next guests to visit. Good night. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. If you want more scary stories from me, featuring ghosts, demons, monsters, and some very disturbing people, check out my other podcast, Tales from the Break Room, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite podcast app. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.